Got a bitch in El Salvador, basket too. Got a bitch in Barcelona, got a bitch in Peru. Got a bitch in Panama, that's Romanian food. I put on my own, fuck with Brazilians too. And she don't know English, but she know my name. Swipe for the shit, she gon' touch the gang, and I'ma hit it from the back, she gon' spin 10 ways. And she don't like this, she like bunch of days. Put the hoops in the air like she born and raised. And I want some Mexicans for my price out there. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She fell in love with the dog. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She fell in love with the dog. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She fell in love with the dog. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She fell in love with the dog. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She wanna fuck with a real gang member. Shawty, I'm mamacita. Bitch, your body's rectangulars. Then I thought this, I make that phone run on the run. I'm in the set with the lost, push it up. I'm in love with the nigga from the hood. $1 nigga posted it up. Mamacita, mamacita. The way you move your body, really wanna eat ya. Siempre solita, ella bien bonita. I love your body, cause I really love your features. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She fell in love with the dog. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She fell in love with the dog. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She fell in love with the dog. Shawty, I'm mamacita. She fell in love with the dog.
Yeah, it's Dark Lord J-Dog, Dark Payback, whatever you want to call me. But anyways, this is how you can beat any, as long as you have the characters in front of you. Mine are all relic 8, except for Jedi Knight Revan, who's the most important. He's only relic 7. But all the Zetas are there. 6 on Rey, 3 on Revan, 2 on JKL, 4 on Gas, 3 on Cat. So what you want to do is when you get, you find a team with an Ahsoka that's slower than yours, so before Kenobi can let her deal that crazy annihilate-like special, you block her from doing it. Now, it doesn't matter that I didn't do any damage, because that's not how I was trying to do damage. I'm just trying to weather the storm until my team can do what I know they can do. And Rey's got this thing where if they go under 50%, they become invulnerable, and when her ultimate's activated, before she hits you with it, you become, oh shit, it's never happened before. There we go. Whew, scared me there. So that's their biggest, and now look, we're all invulnerable. Smash. Look at that. Just killing shit. Told you. So we've got Gear 13, Relegate 6 Saber, 1 Ultimate, Galactic Legends Ray. Gear 13, Relic 7, 3 Zetas, Jedi Knight Revan, get 15 Relic 8, 2 Zetas, Jedi Knight Luke, get 15 Relic 8, 4 Zetas, General Anakin Skywalker, get 15 Relic 8, 3 Zetas, Commander Ahsoka Tano. And we're all invincible again. Now here's where the hard part comes in, beating Kenobi in under 50 seconds, because I took all that time talking. It's gonna suck if I can't even use the video. There he goes. So yeah, that's it. I'm gonna show you guys my Relic 8s, and then that's it. And I'll just get the music playing again.
Hey, P, you got a camera? I wanna put the chains on this shit. Dumb bitch.
I'm the only Rey Jedi training in the top 25, in the top 50, and the top 25. So look, it says Eternal Emperor, Jedi, JMK, C, JMK, 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 JML, JMK, 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 Lord Vader, JMK, JMK, Lord Vader, JMK, JML, JMK. There's me, Darth Payback. Look at that, 23. My fleet rank's not bad either.
Out the chopper when I knock him down. Niggas out on Instagram, but when we slide, they not around. Nigga, when I'm off the Remy, bitch, I'm popping out. I ain't in the house, bitch, I'm popping out. Hey, I just want the money, I don't want the clout. Niggas mad at me, they bitch at my house. I just want the money, I don't want a spouse. I don't tell on myself, Mickey Mouse. You a scared nigga, stay in the house. Don't play with my name on your mouth. Hop up out the bushes at your mama house. Hey, hop up out the wall at your auntie house. Hey, if I can't get no money, bitch, I kick though. If I can't get no money, bitch, I kick though. We got drums and we rockin' out. And ain't no shooting out of Florence, bitch, we hopping out. Block out the chopper when I knock them down. Niggas out on Instagram, but when we slide, they not around. Nigga, we got drums and we rockin' out. And ain't no shooting out of Florence, bitch, we hopping out. Block out the chopper when I knock them down. Niggas out on Instagram, but when we slide, they not around. Nigga. Charge cat bashing. Pull up to your hood, how your young niggas trap. I'm the Locust Park founder. Stripping down all his trousers. 33 shots clip longer than a tower. 20 per street demon, leave his guts on the cement. We slide on the ops, we can't leave if they breathe. Put the beam where he cheats. I'm trying to shoot where his teeth is. Pull it to this dome, catch a body, then we leave. Mom was a murderer. Know they made a dope killer. Made a couple dope killers. Killer season. I'm tired of the real shooter shit. Niggas got the guns on the ground, but they ain't shooting shit. Race round killers. All I know is shooters. A-Train be the gang. If you ain't fucking with the move, throw your hands up. In them gang songs, A-Train be the gang. Throw your gang, bitches, gang time. You ain't fucking with us, nigga ain't no rapper.
Do the op style, give you shots like a technical. 50-some shots, cause my Glock grew some testicles. A beef with my ops, all them little niggas that say hood. Hussein, that's the same shit. Babies in the overs with the EBK game, bitch. Leaving niggas stinking, they know my game dangerous. I'm busting out the ops bar day cause I ain't basic. Sound infant, drop the shooter, bitch. Sliding with this Ruger, bitch. Chopper going stupid, split a nigga with do the bitch. These other niggas tap, they wouldn't know what to do with this. Said they wouldn't know what to do if they run up on them and blew it. Crash coming just through the blick. It's war in my city, we really sliding, we shoot a bitch. I'm really getting money, give a fuck about if I lose a bitch. Give a fuck about if I lose a bitch. I'ma do my shit. Stick around and watch me do my shit. I'm the biggest shit. Fuck around, I had to use my hips. I don't mean as fuck. Putting down, I had to use my head. Cody's get behind me, do the dash. I'm finna lose my whip. Stupid. Keep it up so shit can get stupid on the dead homies. Better watch your mouth cause we shoot shit. Stupid. Keep it up so shit can get stupid on the dead homies. Better watch your mouth cause we shoot shit. Bitch.
I'm coughing so much.
Niggas don't give a fuck about this virus, the whole niggas still out here in the field, you know, the whole super Vermont, every day on film. I'm out on bail with some guy in the shoe. Can't provide the bucket, so we sliding the coupe. If you hangin' with the suckers, you gon' die with them too. If you hangin' with the suckers, you gon' die with them too. I'm out on bail, bitch, I'm dying to shoot. Can't provide the bucket, so we sliding the coupe. If you hangin' with the suckers, you gon' die with them too. Bitch, I'm the son of the devil, pop violent too. I talk murders in a robbery too. Flip it back, make a double, I'll die for the loot. Snatch your chain, then we slide on blue. Snatch your chain, then we slide on blue. What's up, nigga, don't cuss me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, blood? Nigga, don't blood me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, blood? Nigga, don't cuss me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, blood? Nigga, don't blood me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street.
Say you gon' slide, well I'ma slide too. I ain't no grip on blood, I'm a power. No handgun, but this chopper like 5 tons. Shout out Trey Way for the Hoovers, yeah that's my group. Hey, this nigga think he poppin', he don't pop shit. Treat the ops like an album, I just drop shit. On your block, clean it up with a mop stick. I'm finna buy another chain, nigga, watch this. I'm the hottest on my bitty, this affiliate ain't no semi. Gotta stick with niggas sticky, off a jiggy, getting jiggy. I ain't hit it up like Ricky, got a Billy on my hippie. You ain't finna catch me slipping, Northside, they call me Mitch.
I talk murders in a robbery too. Flip the back, make a double, I'll die for the loot. Snatch your chain, then we slide on blue. Snatch your chain, then we slide on blue. What's up, cuz? Nigga, don't cuss me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, blood? Nigga, don't blood me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, cuz? Nigga, don't cuss me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, blood? Nigga, don't blood me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street.
Bitches gangland, a real pocket of attention. I steady dissing, niggas trying to get a mention. We was busting down the stage, we was flocking for the digits. My bro do anything just to get it. I don't phase a toe pistol. We pull up with things, niggas got issues. Niggas ain't hanging with the gang, ain't official. She ain't trying to fucking give me brain, I dismiss it. I'm cussing on the thing about some bitch, I be posted with the thugs. I ain't no crip or blood, ain't no sub, till that's on the gang, they show me love. They don't turn their heads here and look our way when we show up. Niggas wanna bang the ace since we up.
I talk murders in a robbery too. Flip the back, make a double, I'll die for the loot. Snatch your chain, then we slide on blue. Snatch your chain, then we slide on blue. What's up, cuz? Nigga, don't cuss me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, blood? Nigga, don't blood me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, cuz? Nigga, don't cuss me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. What's up, blood? Nigga, don't blood me. I ain't no crip, no blood off Mover Street. Oh, boy, police ask me, you wanna go with the crips or the bloods? I tell them on the damn homies, I'm gonna keep my own self, cause I'm not cool with none of them niggas. I'm over like, hope them niggas can both go. Hope they ain't got both get it. Oh, let me face the both of them niggas. Dead homies. Stop playing. Alright. Oh boy.
Yeah, money, man, money. Hey, dog, what you do when you wake up? Huh? Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Talking about them bags you pop, boy. I don't think you about that life, boy. I think it's time that you gon' stop. Hold up, tell the DJ stop, bring it to the top. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. I don't think you boys should stop him pulling out the big body like it's out the gym. Hot box the whip, use the weed as oxygen. Got this bad bitch with me, think her name is Kim. Shorty got a crazy ass, but her body slim. Looking wavy in them heels, so I'm rocking the tin. Religion on me, let me fix my slim. Know a couple big dogs that'll ride for him. Stop a nigga out quick if you fuck with a kid. Watch me formulate these words, all I need is a pen. Moved up in life, cause I ain't trying to sleep in the pen. Niggas say keep a stack, so I'm bringing out 10. Ain't nobody give me shit, so what you think I'ma live? Cypher Dawn McAbee riding out to the end. He in that blue Lambo, catch me in the bench. Shining like a rich boy with the beat this rich. See this ice on me, better keep on the list. Cause I'm icy as a motherfucker. One that I never cover, going to the dog can't trip. Cause I ain't a sucker, all about this cash can't go broke. Cause I ain't a lover, Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Talking about them bags you pop, boy. I don't think you about that life, boy. I think it's time that you gon' stop. Hold up, tell the DJ stop, bring it to the top. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up.
Every day that I wake up, I gotta get my cake up. Cooking all of this work up. Fly niggas, slow bucks. Fuck niggas, don't trust my niggas, let that Mac bust. These fuck niggas, they know what's up. These niggas don't wanna fuck with us. Bitch, watch, so shit, we on another level. Niggas know I'm getting money, niggas check my bezel. Fuck is you talking about? Bitch, niggas don't play the set. Niggas, your pockets hungry, looking like they going lit. Step your shit up, I'm trying to run my check up. Nigga, I'm stunting, see these diamonds on my neck, bro? Nigga, that's racks, bitch. It's stacks, bitch. Got my pockets looking like a fucking fat bitch. Stacks in sight for dawn, bitch. And see the mess. Be the hottest in the shit, nigga, fuck the rest. Born a real nigga and loyal to my fucking death. Niggas be wildin', so I gotta keep a fucking best.
Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Talking about them bags you pop, boy. I don't think you about that life, boy. I think it's time that you stop. Hold up till the DJ stop, bring it to the top. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up. Wake up to get my cake up. All I think is money, get your weight up.
Wake your cake, flip the cake, yeah, get changed like after the doc. Drizzy, Dre, Drizzy, no young money, my petty adult status. G's will come see you with
Dragonstone, the Targaryens, last of the Valyrian ruling families, became a major power in the Narrow Sea, controlling trade with the threat of dragonfire until 2 BC, when Aegon Targaryen atop his dragon Balerion and his sister wives Visenya on Vhagar and Rhaenys on Meraxes invaded the continent. By this time, Westeros was divided into 7 kingdoms, known as the Kingdom of the North, the Kingdom of the Mountain and Vale, the Kingdom of the Isles and Rivers, the Kingdom of the Rock, the Kingdom of the Reach, the Kingdom of the Storm and Dorne. Defeating nearly every kingdom, Aegon was crowned King of Westeros and forged the Iron Throne from the swords of his defeated enemies. In the north, they remained under House Stark, as did the Vale under House Arryn, and the Westerlands under House Lannister, while House Hoare of the Kingdom of Isles and Rivers was destroyed, with their territory split into the Iron Islands, ruled by House Greyjoy, the Riverlands, ruled by House Tully, and the Crownlands, ruled by the King from the capital of King's Landing. Further south, the Targaryens destroyed House Gardner, and so left the Reach under House Tyrell, while House Durrandon was defeated in the Stormlands, but lived on through their successors, as the new lord of the territory, Orys Baratheon, best friend and rumored half-brother of King Aegon, married the daughter of the fallen Durrandon king, in addition to adopting their sigil and house words. Yet while these mighty realms fell, the mixed Rhoynar-Andal population of Dorne resisted under House Martell, fighting a brutal guerrilla war over the first decade of Aegon's rule, ultimately ending with the conqueror admitting defeat and signing a peace treaty. Over the next 3 centuries, House Targaryen ruled the continent of Westeros, with some of their kings acting as absolute monarchs through the overwhelming might of their dragons. Though these rulers varied in wisdom and aptitude for the position, one of the most notable of Aegon's descendants was King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, who ended 2 civil wars to preside over a golden age of peace and prosperity. Unfortunately, his descendants squandered these accomplishments, and the realm was torn apart in the dents of the Dragon Civil War, fought from 129 to 131 AC. A vicious conflict between the chosen heir, Rhaenyra Targaryen, and her younger brother Aegon, who claimed the crown against his father's wishes, but was backed by tradition and precedent, which favored male heirs. The conflict not only killed thousands, but also wiped out nearly all the dragons, leading to their eventual extinction and a significant loss in power and prestige for House Targaryen. Even so, the descendants of Valyria continued to rule for many years, with Daeron the Good standing out as another exceptional king, able to bring Dorne into the realm through a marriage alliance, and win a civil war against his half-brother Daemon Blackfyre. For many of these years, Daeron the Good was aided by his loyal half-brother Brynden Rivers, nicknamed Bloodraven, serving as Hand of the King, the second most powerful position in the realm, but he eventually ended up as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch until he disappeared during a ranging beyond the wall. Over the next few decades, House Targaryen continued to defend their throne against House Blackfyre, but won all 5 wars until their enemies were seemingly destroyed, though in truth they survived through the female line. The last great Targaryen king to rule, Aegon V, had a fascinating life. As he was so far down the line of succession, no one expected him to take the throne, and so was allowed more freedom in his youth, serving as a squire to the hedge knight Sir Duncan the Tall. As a result of traveling across the continent and getting to know the small folk, he became their advocate as king, earning love from commoners and hatred from the nobility threatened by his reforms. Yet Aegon V's reign was cut short when he died in a failed attempt to hatch dragon eggs, causing a terrible fire which killed the king and many others. Yet while these notable kings performed great deeds worthy of praise, their dynasty ultimately met its end under Mad King Aerys II, a cruel, incompetent monarch whose son and heir, Rhaegar Targaryen, disappeared with Lyanna Stark, a daughter of House Stark, betrothed to Lord Robert Baratheon of the Stormlands. Believing her kidnapped, House Baratheon of the Stormlands allied with House Stark of the North, House Aeron of the Vale, and House Tully of the Riverlands to fight a rebellion which defeated and deposed House Targaryen. After the death of Rhaegar in combat, and Aerys II by his Kingsguard, Sir Jaime Lannister, Robert Baratheon was crowned King of Westeros, presiding over 15 years of relative peace through his personal ferocity as a warrior, in addition to the strength of his alliances. Unfortunately for the Starks, Lyanna died in Dorne, while the Targaryens were almost entirely wiped out, save for young Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen, the youngest children of the Mad King who escaped to Essos. Years of poverty and struggle turned Viserys into a foolish, impulsive young man, but he never gave up the goal of retaking the Iron Throne, finally finding an opportunity when his ally Illyrio Mopatis of Pentos arranged for his sister Daenerys to marry Khal Drogo, a powerful Dothraki horse lord they hoped would invade Westeros for the Targaryens. Meanwhile, in the far north of Westeros, White Walkers were spotted for the first time in thousands of years. It was at this point the A Song of Ice and Fire series began in 297 AC. After years of peace, the realm was torn apart when political scheming and greedy ambition led to the assassination of the Hand of the King, Jon Arryn, followed by the death of King Robert Baratheon and execution of Lord Eddard Stark, 3 longtime friends whose alliance maintained stability in the 7 kingdoms. Yet now with all 3 gone, chaos erupted, allowing House Lannister of the Westerlands to take direct control over the Iron Throne through Joffrey Baratheon, the eldest son and heir of Robert Baratheon, and his wife Cersei Lannister, though in reality, all 3 of their children were fathered by Jaime Lannister, the Queen's twin brother and lover. As both Jon Arryn and Eddard Stark uncovered this secret before their deaths, word had spread, allowing for various claimants to rise, like King Stannis Baratheon, Robert's eldest living brother, and the Lord of Dragonstone, who by tradition was the one true heir to the Iron Throne. Yet their younger sibling Renly also put forth a claim, as he was backed by the Stormlands, which he ruled, and the Reach through his allies in House Tyrell. Seeing the realm divided and weak, the Iron Islands declared independence under King Balon Greyjoy, while King Robb Stark of the North and Riverlands declared independence as well, gathering armies to wage war against the Lannisters in retaliation for their execution of Robb's father, Eddard Stark. The Vale, meanwhile, remained neutral, as did Southern Dorne. Known as the War of the Five Kings, this conflict devastated Westeros and killed thousands during a time when the White Walker threat grew larger in the north, with the pleas and warnings of the Night's Watch largely ignored. In the east, Viserys Targaryen was killed, but his sister Daenerys proved shrewd and fearsome, undergoing a great journey in metamorphosis from the property of her brother to the Khaleesi wife of a great Khal. Yet it was only after the death of her husband that her destiny truly revealed itself when she accidentally performed a magic ritual, allowing 3 dragon eggs to hatch, thereby becoming the mother of dragons. With Viserion, Rhaegal, and Drogon by her side, Daenerys made her way to Slaver's Bay, where she purchased an army of unsullied slave soldiers, eunuchs who drank an elixir which lessened pain and trained their whole lives for combat. Knowing what it was to be a slave, Daenerys liberated her army and asked them to fight as freedmen, launching a campaign to end slavery in the region, conquering Astapor, Yunkai, and Meereen, where she ruled as queen. Yet despite her best intentions, both Yunkai and Astapor rebelled and gathered a great alliance to wage war against Daenerys. Back in Westeros, as the war progressed, nearly every claimant king was killed, with Renly defeated by Stannis, who took the Stormlands, while the Reach went to the Lannisters in the capital, though they also lost a king when the volatile Joffrey Baratheon was assassinated, allowing for the succession of his younger brother Tommen. In the Iron Islands, Balon fell from a bridge, likely assassinated by his younger brother Euron Greyjoy, who succeeded as king before leading a fleet east to marry an ally with Daenerys Targaryen. Though King Robb Stark never lost a battle, he ultimately made political mistakes, which led to his assassination and betrayal by houses Frey and Bolton, which took power in the Riverlands and north under the Lannisters in the capital. With enemy kings falling and the power of House Lannister and Tyrell behind him, Tommen Baratheon had great potential as king. Yet after the murder of his grandfather Tywin Lannister and great-uncle Kevan Lannister, the young monarch lost his most cunning and wise advisors, greatly weakening his chance of bringing stability to the realm. King Stannis, meanwhile, initially won the Stormlands with the aid of the Red Priestess Melisandre, a sorceress follower of R'hllor from Asshai, who believed Stannis was Azor Ahai reborn. Yet he steadily lost power until making the drastic decision to retreat with his army to the northern wall, where they aided the Night's Watch against a massive army of wildlings invading the south to escape the White Walkers. Establishing a foothold at the wall, Stannis then embarked on a campaign to conquer the north and take Winterfell from House Bolton. By 300 AC and the end of Book 5 in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, the remaining kings vying for the Iron Throne also faced several outside powers threatening the realm, not only from Daenerys Targaryen in Slaver's Bay, but also young Aegon Targaryen, yet another possible candidate, supported by Illyrio Mopatis of Pentos, the mercenary Golden Company, and the former Westerosi spy master Varys, who claimed this young man was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and his wife Elia Martell, that was supposedly killed during Robert's rebellion, but was actually smuggled away to Essos. Another threat to the realm came from the brilliant strategist Peter Baelish, also known as Littlefinger, who orchestrated many of the most consequential events of the war in order to facilitate his own rise to power, marrying and then killing Lady Lysa Arryn so he could have direct influence over her son Lord Robert Arryn, thereby controlling the entire Vale, while still possessing further plans to expand his power. Then there were two branches of House Martell and Dorne, who stayed out of the conflict thus far, while making their own plans in secret, with the Prince's faction seeking a marriage alliance with Daenerys Targaryen, while the Sand Snake nieces of the Prince wanted outright war against the Lannisters. Finally, there was Bran Stark, a younger child of Eddard Stark, who traveled north with a group of companions following prophetic dreams, until reaching the cave of the Three-Eyed Crow, where some surviving children of the forest lived with Brynden Rivers, the brother of King Daeron the Good, who survived the long years since his disappearance, and was now a decrepit old man whose body was intertwined with a weirwood tree. Yet he possessed great magical powers, teaching Bran green-seeing and skin-changing so he could see the past and present through the eyes of hard trees across the continent, as well as into the minds of humans and animals. Bran was training to become the new Three-Eyed Crow, as there was a larger destiny he must fulfill. A special thanks to all those who contribute to Civilization X, like Barachalo, Average Soul the Healer, Sir Rick Loam, and Kyle Blitzsword. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationX, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend. One app with infinite possibilities. Install and go. Stating he had no desire to steal his sister's crown. But Criston Cole eventually convinced him his family would be killed if Rhaenyra became queen, as she would no doubt seek to eliminate her rivals. Believing the safety of his family was at stake, Aegon saw no choice but to take the throne and commit himself to the war. Over on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra was pregnant with her 6th child, having given birth to 2 more sons with Daemon Targaryen, naming them Aegon and Viserys. But when she heard her father was dead and younger brother usurped the throne, her rage was so intense she went into early labor and lost the child, blaming Aegon the Elder, Alicent, and their supporters for the death. Calling upon her allies, Rhaenyra was crowned the true Queen of Westeros from her seat on Dragonstone, proudly wearing the crown of her father Viserys and great-grandfather Jaehaerys, as it was stolen from the royal palace by Sir Stephen Darkland, a knight of the Kingsguard who abandoned Aegon II, believing she was the rightful queen. Gathering her most loyal supporters, including her husband Daemon Targaryen, her father's cousin Rhaenys Targaryen, the Sea Snake Lord Corlys Velaryon, and her 3 eldest sons, Rhaenyra held the first meeting of the Black Council, where they went over their strategy for the war. Seeking powerful allies, Queen Rhaenyra sent her eldest son Jaehaerys upon Vermax to the Vale of Arryn in the north, while Lucerys rode Arrax to the Stormlands. Hoping to keep them from harm, Rhaenyra sent them only as messengers, forbidding them from engaging in combat. Her husband, however, Daemon Targaryen, flying atop Caraxes, had no such restriction when he flew to the Riverlands. Fortunately for the locals, no violence was necessary, as House Strong surrendered Harrenhal without a fight. Winning the support of House Blackwood, Queen Rhaenyra's forces won the Battle of the Burning Mill and Battle of Stonehenge, defeating House Bracken, the greatest Green supporter in the region. While Daemon completed his conquest of the Riverlands, 15-year-old Jaehaerys embraced his role as a diplomat, securing alliances with House Arryn of the Vale, as well as several of the most powerful houses in the north, including the Manderleys, Borrells, and Sunderlands, before securing the Pact of Ice and Fire with Lord Cregan of House Stark, promising a marriage between the Starks and Targaryens. Yet while their 2 northern ventures succeeded, the southern mission, led by Lucerys, thought to be the safest of the 3, ended in complete disaster, making the mistake of assuming Borros Baratheon was with the Blacks because his father was an ardent supporter of Rhaenyra. Lucerys arrived to find Aemond of the Greens negotiating an alliance. Borros informed Lucerys that Aemond offered to marry one of his daughters, and since Rhaenyra's boys were all betrothed, the Blacks could not beat that offer. Still holding a grudge for the loss of his eye, Aemond wanted to attack the boy, but Borros forbid it in his hall. However, once Lucerys flew away, Borros gave permission for Aemond to give chase. Engaging in the dance over Shipbreaker Bay, young Arrax was no match for Vhagar, and so both Lucerys and his dragon were killed. While Rhaenyra cried and raged over the death of her son, Daemon Targaryen swore vengeance and reached out to his underworld contacts in the capital, arranging for the assassins Blood and Cheese to infiltrate the Red Keep using secret tunnels underneath. Killing a handmaiden, they captured Alicent, Helaena, Jaehaerys, Jaehaera, and Maelor before forcing the king's wife to choose which of her 3 children would die. Threatening to rape her daughter and kill them all if she refused, Helaena reluctantly chose her youngest Maelor, reasoning that he did not understand what was happening and would not suffer. But the assassins instead cut off the head of her eldest son, Jaehaerys, before fleeing into the night. Blood was soon caught trying to escape the city with the prince's head in a bag, and so was tortured and killed. But Cheese and the former dancer Miseria, who arranged it all for Daemon, were never caught. This powerful act of vengeance then did further damage as Queen Helaena grew depressed and despondent, unable to look at her son Maelor since she named him to die. The king, meanwhile, fell to drink and rage, consumed by hatred. Though Aegon enjoyed the company of many women aside from his wife, their marriage remained amicable until the death of their child, when they stopped sleeping together or even communicating at all. Hoping to strike back against the Blacks, Sir Criston Cole sent the Kingsguard, Auric Cargyle, on a mission to infiltrate Dragonstone, posing as his twin brother Eric, who served as Queen's Guard for Rhaenyra. On a mission of assassination, possibly against the Queen or her children, his target was never discovered, as he was spotted and exposed by his brother before completing the mission. Engaging in single combat to the death, stories say the brothers killed each other out of knightly duty but died in each other's arms, while others, like Rhaenyra's Jester Mushroom, claimed they suffered grievous wounds quickly and cursed each other as traitors. With the Blacks winning allies and striking back with fury against the Greens, the Hand of the King Otto Hightower did his best to strengthen their position, but largely failed in many areas as he was unable to secure an alliance with Dorne, which claimed neutrality, was receiving no reply from his messages to the Ironborn, and could not even secure his own homeland of the Reach, where only the houses Hightower and Redwyne pledged for Aegon, while houses Costain, Mullendor, Tarly, Rowan, and Grimm sided with Rhaenyra. House Tyrell, seeing their realm divided, declared neutrality. sending word to Ormond Hightower to destroy the enemy lords of the Reach. Otto next set his sights across the sea to Essos, where the kingdom of the Three Daughters agreed to ally with Aegon Targaryen in exchange for the Stepstones and trade rights. Yet this victory was too little to make an immediate impact, and the corrupt, inefficient kingdom of the Three Daughters needed time to prepare their forces. Therefore, the king dismissed his grandfather and appointed Criston Cole as Hand of the King. Far more violent and warlike than his predecessor, Cole implemented an aggressive strategy, beginning by executing all Black faction prisoners unless they bent the knee to Aegon. Yet only 3 submitted, while the rest chose to keep their honor in death. Entering into a new phase of the war, Westeros was properly fractured, with the North, Riverlands, and Vale pledged to Rhaenyra, the Westerlands and Stormlands siding with Aegon, the Reach and Crown lands divided, Dorne remaining neutral, and the Iron Islands undeclared. Therefore, Cole first elected to focus on the nearby Crown lands, which, outside the capital, largely stood with Rhaenyra, sacking Duskendale and beheading its lord. Cole then moved on to Rook's Rest, but House Staunton had time to send for aid, prompting Princess Rhaenys of the Blacks to arrive on her dragon Meleys. Engaging in the Battle of Rook's Rest, Criston Cole attacked the enemy from the ground with scorpions and archers, while King Aegon flew on Sunfire and Prince Aemond upon Vhagar. Badly outnumbered, Rhaenys nonetheless put up a valiant struggle, seeing Meleys viciously bite Sunfire's neck, which caused a chaotic melee between all 3 that sent them crashing to the ground. Suffering a terrible defeat, Rhaenys and her dragon were killed, while Aemond and Vhagar emerged unharmed, completing the conquest of Rook's Rest. The king and his dragon, meanwhile, also survived, but were both critically wounded, with Sunfire tearing a wing and Aegon suffering burns and broken bones. The king was so injured, he required months of painful recovery, spending most of his time sedated with milk of the poppy. As Aegon II was incapacitated, his brother Aemon Targaryen was named regent as protector of the realm. A harsh, courageous, and bloody-minded warrior, bonded to the oldest, most powerful dragon known to exist, Aemond was prepared to escalate the war and achieve victory at any cost. As Sunfire was unable to fly, a garrison was left to feed and protect him, but this small force could not stand when House Mouton recaptured Rook's Rest and sent their warriors to slay the dragon. Although Sunfire's wound did not heal perfectly, he was recovered enough to defend himself and take flight, escaping further harm. Devastated by the loss of his beloved wife, Corlys Velaryon nearly left Rhaenyra's cause, but was convinced to stay when Jacaerys named him Hand of the Queen. Though the Blacks had many powerful allies, most were far from the center of the conflict, making it difficult to respond quickly and with adequate force in or near the Crown lands. Thus, the death of Rhaenys prompted the Queen to send away the younger children of her family, as well as their dragons, for safety, sending Joffrey, Taraxis, and 3 dragon eggs to the Vale of Arryn alongside Rhaena Targaryen, Daemon's daughter from his first marriage, while Aegon the Younger, Stormcloud, Viserys, and a dragon egg were sent to be fostered by the Prince of Pentos. With his brothers gone, the Queen's heir, Jacaerys Velaryon, took on increasing responsibilities in the next stage of the war. Knowing that Targaryen men over the years fathered many illegitimate children, with small folk and nobility alike, Jacaerys thought up a plan to raise more dragon riders by putting out a call to the people of Dragonstone, promising great reward to any who successfully bonded a dragon. Though many failed, were wounded, or even burned alive, some few succeeded, like Hugh Hammer upon Vermithor, Wolf of the White upon Silverwing, Adam of Hall on Seasmoke, and the girl Nettles riding Sheepstealer. Adam of Hall and his brother Alan were bastard-born children, supposedly fathered by Laenor Velaryon, though they were more likely the children of Corlys Velaryon. Therefore, when Adam claimed a dragon, Rhaenyra legitimized both brothers, allowing the Lord of Driftmark to name the eldest his heir. With the dragon seeds at their backs, the Blacks gained a decisive advantage over the enemy, but soon suffered a catastrophe in the Battle of the Gullet, remembered as one of the bloodiest sea battles in history. At last fulfilling their agreement, the Kingdom of the Three Daughters sent a fleet of 90 ships to break the Valyrian sea blockade around the capital, but first, they ran into the vessel carrying Rhaenyra's sons to Pentos, able to capture Viserys and his dragon egg, while Aegon fled atop Stormcloud, who was gravely wounded, but nonetheless made it to Dragonstone, ensuring his riders' safety before dying. The fleet then attacked the Valyrian ships at the Gullet, causing Jacaerys to lead the dragon seeds into battle, destroying 62 of 90 vessels. The foreign fleet, however, had experience fighting dragons, able to bring down Vermax and kill its rider Jacaerys. The remaining fleet was also able to sack and burn nearby Spicetown and Hightide on Driftmark, eliminating a third of the Valyrian fleet, slaughtering their people and destroying much of Corlys Velaryon's wealth. Though the fleet sailed back to Essos with much treasure and a valuable war hostage, the overwhelming loss of ships and men caused the Kingdom of the Three Daughters to consider the battle a miserable defeat, leading to a political crisis and their very own civil war. Though the Greens struck a devastating blow with the death of Jacaerys and sacking of Driftmark, their allies in Essos were now out of the war, and the Valerian fleet remained in control of the Narrow Sea, meaning the Battle of the Gullet was technically a black victory, as the enemy failed to end the blockade of the capital. Distraught by the death of yet another son, matters worsened for Rhaenyra during the Battle of the Honeywine in the Reach, when her allies were on the brink of victory against House Hightower, only for Prince Daeron, the youngest brother of King Aegon, to fly his dragon Tessarion into battle, defeating the Blacks. Targeting the Riverlands, the Greens, Aemond and Criston Cole, led an army to Harrenhal, expecting to face Daemon Targaryen, but the fortress was empty as the rogue prince departed, eventually making his way to Maidenpool, where he remained for a time with the Dragonseed Nettles, possibly beginning a romantic affair. Seeking to join Aemond's host at Harrenhal, House Lannister of the Westerlands led over 8,000 men into their eastern neighbor. Yet the lords of the Riverlands knew their territory well and were committed to victory, repeatedly throwing themselves and their warriors at the Lannister army, whittling down enemy forces. Despite House Lannister winning the battle at the Red Fork and battle at Acorn Hall, they lost 2 commanders and many men along the way, with the Riverlords continually regrouping and renewing their attacks. The last stand defense against the Lannister advance then followed at the battle by the Lakeshore, where the Riverlords were joined by Lord Roderick Dustin and the Winter Wolves, 2,000 hard-fighting northern warriors, unwilling to wait for the larger northern host to gather, and marched south seeking a glorious death, in keeping with the tradition of older men voluntarily leaving their homes to die in the wilderness, thereby ensuring more food for their family during harsh winter months. Thus, the Winter Wolves were entirely prepared to die, making them possibly the most fearsome, devastating fighters in the entire war. Engaging in what was alternatively called the Fish Feed, the Lannister army was entirely destroyed, while the Blacks lost 2,000 men, including 2/3 of the Winter Wolves, who fought with unparalleled ferocity. The defeat of the Greens in the Riverlands then went on to have reverberating effects across the continent, leading to many more victories for the Blacks, like in the Westerlands, where the destruction of their armies meant the wealthy realm was largely undefended. This in turn caused the Red Kraken of House Greyjoy to declare for the Blacks so he could plunder the Westerlands and Reach, capturing Case and Fair Isle as well as sacking Lannisport. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra was still heartbroken by the death of her sons and could hold back her wrath no longer. Organizing the invasion of King's Landing, Rhaenyra and her husband, atop their dragons, took the capital in less than a day, as the Green armies were on campaign and the garrison was betrayed by the Gold Cloaks, city watchmen loyal to their former commander Daemon Targaryen. Finally set upon her rightful throne, Rhaenyra set about dealing with those captured during the conquest. Unfortunately for the Queen, however, these did not include her still injured rival, Aegon II, who escaped under the care of Larys Strong. Neither did she find the king's children, Jaehaera and Maelor, as they were sent away with the Kingsguard to supposedly safe locations. Yet while Jaehaera arrived at Storm's End without issue, young Maelor was attacked and killed by an angry mob at Bitterbridge in the Reach. Though Rhaenyra was robbed of these captives, those remaining in the capital included the increasingly depressed Queen Helena, held captive in her room, but largely left alone until she finally threw herself from a window, ending her own life, possibly after learning about Maelor's death. Another valuable prisoner was the Queen's longtime hated rival, Alicent Hightower, who was spared physical harm, but nonetheless suffered greatly in captivity, ripping apart her clothes and cursing Rhaenyra when she learned of Helena's death. Others on the Green Council, like Alicent's father, Sir Otto Hightower, and Sir Jasper Wilde, were executed, while Sir Tywin Lannister was given to torturers. At the height of Rhaenyra's reign, when she made plans to finish off her enemies, Alicent tried to negotiate with the Queen, offering a compromise where the kingdom was split in two, but Rhaenyra refused, explaining that she would have given her enemies positions of honor in her court, but they gave up any chance of generosity when they stole her birthright and killed her sons.
Smooth, rich, or balanced, Starbucks has a coffee that's made to be yours.
Back in the Riverlands, Aemond and Criston Cole heard about the many Green defeats across the continent and left Harrenhal with the Regent, going on a one Dragon Rider campaign of terror across the region, while the Hand of the King led his army to the Reach. Yet the warriors of these lands were now hardened veterans with burgeoning reputations, who alongside their ferocious northern allies were unwilling to let the hated Kingmaker retreat without issue, whittling down his forces through hit-and-run attacks, until their final victory in the Butcher's Ball, utterly slaughtering the Greens and killing Criston Cole. Having won a great victory in the Reach, Ormond Hightower marched his Green Army west, hoping to take back King's Landing. Along the way, they continued to accumulate victories against House Merryweather in the Siege of Longtable, and House Caswell in the burning of Bitterbridge, where Daeron and Tessarion sought vengeance for the death of his nephew Maelor. With their enemies reinforced by men from the Riverlands, the next battle was fought at Tumbleton, where Rhaenyra's forces might have won a great victory if not for the traitorous dragon seeds Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White, who betrayed the Blacks and secured victory for the Greens. Yet this battle was not a total loss for the Blacks, as the Winter Wolves of the North fought with such ferocity they carved their way through enemy ranks to kill the commanders Ormond and Brynden Hightower. This victory also had other negative consequences for the Greens, as Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White proved to be honorless vagrants without loyalty to anyone but themselves. Back in King's Landing, the increasingly paranoid Queen was appalled by the betrayal of the two dragon seeds and feared the others might turn as well, ordering the arrest of Adam Valerion and Nettles. Warned by his grandfather, Adam escaped King's Landing on his dragon sea smoke, leading to the arrest of Corlys Valerion, which in turn caused his fleet to abandon the Queen. Nettles, meanwhile, was under the protection of her possible lover, Daemon Targaryen, who refused to comply with Rhaenyra's order, instead sending Nettles flying away to safety, while he dropped all other priorities and spread the word he was waiting for Aemon Targaryen in Harrenhal. The brother of the king then arrived on Vhagar and engaged Daemon upon Caraxes in the Battle above the God's Eye, ending with both dragons locked together as they crashed into the ground. Just before impact, Daemon ensured his enemy's death by jumping from his seat to launch through the air, stabbing Aemon through his one eye with the Valyrian steel sword Darksister. Eventually, the remains of the dragons Caraxes and Vhagar were found, along with the corpse of Aemon Targaryen. Daemon's remains, however, were never located, causing some to claim he survived and spent the rest of his days with his beloved Nettles. Finding herself in an increasingly difficult situation, Rhaenyra unknowingly suffered yet another blow when Larry Strong smuggled the recuperating Aegon II onto Dragonstone, where he reunited with his dragon Sunfire. Gathering all those willing to betray Rhaenyra, they launched a coup and took Dragonstone for the Greens. Princess Baela, the daughter of Daemon, rode Moondancer against the enemy, but her dragon was killed by Sunfire and she was captured. Aegon II survived the fighting, but once again suffered a terrible injury by breaking his legs. With the Queen's fortunes crumbling all around her, rioters were creating chaos in the capital, allowing petty usurpers to rise and find followers, like when the knight Sir Perkin the Flea declared Tristan Truefire as King of Westeros, claiming his legitimacy as the bastard son of old King Viserys I, and bestowing knighthood on any willing to join them. At the same time, a mad prophet called the Shepherd rallied a great mob to storm the Dragon Pit, hoping to slaughter the remaining dragons of House Targaryen, naming them demons, bringing forth the doom of men. Desperate to protect the dragons and fight like his brothers had, young Joffrey Valerion disobeyed orders, mounted his mother's dragon Syrax, and flew into battle. Unfortunately for the prince, Syrax was unaccustomed to his weight and tossed him off mid-flight, sending him falling to his death below. Losing her mind with worry, Rhaenyra sought aid in retrieving her son, causing 7 courageous knights to voluntarily ride out amidst the chaos, seeking the boy. Remembered as the 7 who rode, Sir Giles Ironwood, Sir Willem Royce, and Lord Commander Glendon Good were killed, while the rest successfully found Joffrey's remains and brought them to the Queen. Meanwhile, the storming of the Dragon Pit continued, resulting in the deaths of numerous dragons, including Shrikos, Morgul, Taraxis, Dreamfire, and Syrax. They in turn burned and killed a great many rioters, eventually collapsing the domed roof to crush all beneath. With the city lost, Rhaenyra fled with Aegon the Younger, believing he was her only surviving child, though Viserys still lived as a captive in Essos. In the Reach, Sir Hobart Hightower was left in command of the army, which to this point largely succeeded in conquering the territory for the Greens. Yet he was unable to capitalize on their victories, as the 2 Dragon Seed betrayers were greedy and belligerent, refusing to move until their outrageous demands were met, all the while gathering many dishonorable warriors to their cause. While Ulf the White wanted Highgarden, the capital of the Reach held by House Tyrell, Hugh Hammer sought an even greater prize, donning a crown of black iron to proclaim himself King of Westeros. When young Daeron Targaryen objected by throwing wine in Hugh's face, he threatened to beat the boy, and when Sir Roger Corn removed the crown, the would-be king nailed 3 horseshoes to his skull. Their increasing retinue of men and fearsome dragons, combined with the army's loss of a unifying leader, meant the betrayers were formidable obstacles to progress that could not be easily overcome and would ultimately destroy them. Unwilling to allow Hugh Hammer's treason, the Caltrop conspiracy formed, wherein a group of nobles sought to assassinate the two betrayers. Yet before they could strike, the Second Battle of Tumbleton erupted when Adam Valerion and Sea Smoke led a Riverland army of 4,000 blacks in a vicious surprise attack. Unable to live with the shame of being named a traitor, Adam fought with tremendous courage, engaging in a chaotic melee with the riderless dragons Vermithor and Tessarion, ending with all of them dead or gravely wounded to die soon after. A brutal battle resulting in many nobles and warriors killed. Young Prince Daeron Targaryen was the most notable figure among them, meaning that of Alicent Hightower's 4 children and 3 grandchildren, only Aegon II and Jaehaera remained. Winning a great victory for the Blacks, the Greens were unable to count on the betrayers, as Ulf the White was so drunk he slept through the fighting, and Hugh Hammer was killed by the valiant Green Caltrop, Bold John Roxton, who was then cut down by the False King's men. Though they lost the battle, many Green nobles survived, as the gate to the city remained closed, and the enemy army had no more dragons or siege equipment. Therefore, the Blacks looted the dead and moved on, while the Greens remained with the shattered remnants of their army in town. Deciding to rid themselves of Ulf the White, who was quick to name himself king after Hugh's death, the Caltrops gifted him poisoned wine. Yet the betrayer grew suspicious, and so Sir Hobert Hightower willingly sacrificed himself by drinking the wine and praising its taste, thereby giving Ulf the confidence to partake. Both died moments later. No longer finding a friendly welcome in the Crown lands, most of Rhaenyra's men deserted, and she was forced to sell her crown to buy passage on a ship. Among those still loyal to the Queen were the Manderleys of White Harbor, who begged her to retreat north, where she had many allies. But Rhaenyra suffered so much despair and endured such endless bouts of rage, she could no longer think rationally, refusing all sage advice to instead make her way to Dragonstone, unaware her brother Aegon already took the fortress. Capturing the Queen and her son, Aegon the Younger was held hostage and forced to watch his mother, Queen Rhaenyra of the Black faction, rightful heir to Viserys I, burned alive and eaten by the usurper's dragon Sunfire. Having survived many injuries and won many battles throughout his life, Sunfire's wounds eventually grew worse and he passed away on Dragonstone. With the Queen dead, Aegon II returned to King's Landing and once again sat upon the Iron Throne, finding a city in chaos from rebels and traitors. Having lost control of the capital for a period known as the Moon of 3 Kings, the Shepherd ruled his mob from the ruins of the Dragon Pit, while Trystane Truefire and Sir Perkin the Flea took the Red Keep. Then there was Gaiman Palehair, the 5-year-old son of a prostitute, crowned king in a brothel atop Visenya's Hill, claiming legitimacy as the bastard son of Aegon II. With his mother in control, Gaiman Palehair issued numerous progressive decrees seeking to create equality between men and women. Yet these would-be rulers were soon swept aside by the armies of House Baratheon, which joined Aegon in the capital. Defeating all 3 pretenders, Trystane and the prostitute were executed, while Gaiman Palehair was spared and made a ward of House Targaryen. The Shepherd, who remained defiant until the end, was burned alive along with hundreds of his supporters. Though Rhaenyra was dead, Aegon sat the Iron Throne and a Baratheon army held the capital. Aegon II and the Green faction somehow found themselves on the verge of total annihilation. In this final phase of the war, the North, Riverlands, Vale, and Iron Islands were firmly with the Blacks, while the Crownlands, Reach, and Westerlands were neutralized, leaving only the Stormlands and capital with Aegon II.
LP Smart Side Expert Finish can help you and your crew finish more jobs faster. So you can celebrate today and get back to work tomorrow. LP Smart Side Expert Finish, for the beauty of finished.
Yet of all the enemies they were now facing, the most insurmountable was the northern army of Lord Cregan Stark, who finally finished gathering a massive host of up to 20,000 men to conquer the south for Rhaenyra's son Aegon the Younger. Joining his march to victory were the armies of the Vale, while the Riverland army, recently victorious in the Reach, were even closer, mere days away from King's Landing. Seeking to end the immediate threat, Lord Boros Baratheon led his army out of the capital and engaged the River Lords in the Battle of the King's Road, but he greatly underestimated the young, highly capable enemy leaders like Lord Kermit Tully, Lord Benjicott Blackwood, and Lady Alysanne Blackwood, known collectively as the Lads, and their grizzled veteran warriors, dismissing them as boys and women, only to be soundly defeated. Seeing the tide turning against the Greens, the Crownlands contingent betrayed the Baratheon army as they attempted to retreat, leading to complete and total victory victory for the Blacks. A courageous warrior to the end, Boros slew a dozen knights, as well as the Lords Derry and Malicer, before falling to Kermit Tully. Left with no army at all, and the River Lords only one day from the capital, Aegon II was finished, and the Greens defeated, but still, he refused to consider surrender. When Corlys Velaryon, who was released from prison and named Master of Ships for the King, suggested Aegon join the Night's Watch, the King instead played his final hand by ordering his hostage, Aegon the Younger's ear cut off, so it could be sent to the Blacks as a warning that the boy would be killed if they moved on the capital. This would be the last order he ever gave, as Aegon II, usurper king of the Green faction, was found dead sometime later, assassinated by poisoned wine. Hoping to avoid further bloodshed, Lord Corlys Velaryon set about establishing peace before the enemy could arrive, crowning Rhaenyra's son Aegon III as King of Westeros, hoping this might end the civil war on satisfying terms for the approaching armies. But he was mistaken, as only Lord Cregan Stark of Winterfell held the power and authority to end this conflict, and he would allow no peace until his honor was satisfied. Though the lads of the Riverlands were happy to meet Corlys Velaryon and accept an easy victory, they quickly fell in line behind Cregan Stark, both fearing his wrath and admiring his abilities as a warrior and leader, agreeing to follow his command in how the war must proceed. Known as the Hour of the Wolf, Cregan Stark ruled as Hand of the King, making plans for his massive army to launch a campaign of vengeance against all those who defied Queen Rhaenyra, including the Stormlands, Reach, and Westerlands. He also imprisoned those suspected of murdering Aegon II without his authorization, ultimately calling for the execution of 22 prisoners, including Corlys Velaryon. Yet while Cregan Stark was ready to shed as much blood as he deemed necessary, his harsher tendencies were slowly softened by Lady Alysanne Blackwood, who grew romantically involved with the Lord, offering sage advice that might spare Westeros further suffering. Falling in love with and marrying Lady Alysanne, Cregan agreed to forego his campaign of vengeance, spared the life of Corlys Velaryon, and allowed most of the condemned to join the Night's Watch, though the Kingsguard Giles Belgrave and Master of Whisperers Larys Strong chose death, and thus were personally executed by Lord Stark, wielding Ice, the Valyrian steel sword of his family. As for Lady Alicent, whose machinations led to such destruction, she went mad in captivity and eventually died, a sad, lonely wretch, haunted by the memories of all those she'd lost. Thus it was that the Dance of the Dragon Civil War finally ended, leaving Aegon III, the 11-year-old son of Rhaenyra, as King of Westeros. Though Cregan Stark was granted many rewards by the crown, he refused to take a position on the Regency Council, and only served as Hand of the King for 2 weeks before returning to Winterfell, leaving the Southerners to their own affairs. After 2 years of vicious fighting, the lands of Westeros were utterly ravaged, losing many towns, castles, resources, and lives. Yet perhaps the most impactful consequence of this terrible civil war came from the death of so many dragons and members of the royal family, which left House Targaryen's power and influence massively reduced, lessening further with each passing year until the dragons entirely died out, allowing for the overthrow of their dynasty by King Robert Baratheon of the Stormlands in 283 AC. Following the dance, only 4 dragons survived, 2 of which remained wild the rest of their lives, while Sheepstealer flew with Nettles and played no more part in the affairs of Westeros. That left mourning as the only dragon of House Targaryen by the end of 131 AC, with the king's half-sister Rhaena as their only dragon rider. A special thanks to all those who contribute to Civilization X, like Sir Jeremiah Ironside of House Comsia, Sir Darren of House Ashford, Chris Walder the Crimson Shadow, and Sir Elendil of Numenor. If you'd like to help the channel, be sure to give a like, leave a comment, subscribe, and click on the links below, or else go to patreon.com/CivilizationX, where you can gain early access to videos, vote on future content, and watch the Patreon-only series, Heroes of Lore and Legend. Following his defeat in the War of the Last Alliance, the Dark Lord Sauron was greatly diminished in power, yet his spirit lived on, bound to the One Ring, which remained in the possession of the Dunedain Isildur, High King of Gondor and Arnor. Unable to seek out the ring and take his vengeance, Sauron remained in the shadows for centuries, recovering his strength and planning for his inevitable return to power. Though the Dark Lord was defeated, many of his orcs, trolls, and other servants survived and fled, scattering across the continent to create havoc wherever encountered. After planting a second white tree in Minas Tirith, continuing the lineage of ancient Telperion, which once illuminated the Undying Lands, Isildur and 3 of his sons traveled north to take up residence in Arnor, but failed to arrive as they were attacked by orc raiders near the Gladden Fields. Unwilling to allow the ring to fall into enemy hands, his sons sacrificed themselves to hold the line, while Isildur escaped through the Anduin River. Facing a powerful current, the king was separated from the ring before being spotted and shot with arrows by pursuing orcs. With the Dunedain killed and the orcs unaware of its presence, the One Ring of Power fell to the bottom of the river, where it remained lost to the world for over 2,000 years. Meanwhile, the death of Isildur and his sons left Meneldil, nephew of the High King, as ruler of Gondor, while Valandil, his 4th child, reigned in Arnor. Dividing the royal line into 2 dynasties, the descendants of Anarion and his son Meneldil led the people of Gondor for 2 millennia, while Isildur and his son Valandil left a bloodline that held power over a united Arnor for only a few centuries, before fracturing into smaller kingdoms. Elsewhere in the continent, the middlemen, those descended from humans who did not live in Numenor during the Second Age, were scattered throughout the Westlands, with those living in what became Gondor and Arnor intermixing with the Dunedain, while those in and around the Greenwood became known as the Northmen. To the west and south of the Misty Mountains lived a population of tribal hillmen, later called Dunlendings, who spoke a different language to the other middlemen of the continent, and so were denied friendship and aid because they were not recognized as kin to the Dunedain of Numenor. Living as wildmen for thousands of years, the Dunlendings expanded south and east towards the White Mountains, though some few left their more primitive homelands to make their way north, settling in Eriador, where they founded the village of Bree. Heading towards the Sea of Rune and beyond, the many tribes and nations of the Easterlings were weakened by their defeat in the War of the Last Alliance, but steadily rebuilt their strength, ever eager to fulfill their ambition of conquering the West. The same could be said for the Haradrim of the South, who lived under the influence of the powerful city-state Umbar, where the Black Numenorians loyal to Sauron remained in power. Though the Dark Lord still had allies spread throughout the continent, Mordor was lost to him as the kingdom of Gondor used Minas Ithil, the Towers of the Teeth, and the Tower of Cirith Ungol to keep watch over the land. Having spent much of the Second Age isolated within the Misty Mountains, the dwarves of Durin's folk thrived in Khazad-dûm, growing immensely wealthy from their mining operations. Yet after the defeat of Sauron, loss of Mordor, and scattering of his armies, hordes of wandering orcs now populated the Westlands, with some making their home in the Grey and Misty Mountains. Along the western shores, the Lyquendi, Noldor, and Sindar elves of Lindon lived under the rule of Lord Círdan, and spent their days building ships in the harbor of the Grey Havens, making them available to any of their people who sought passage to the undying lands of the west. Other Noldor and Sindar made their homes alongside the Silvan in Lothlorien, originally ruled by King Amdir until his death in the Battle of Dagorlad during the War of the Last Alliance at the end of the Second Age. Rule was then inherited by his son, Amroth, who fell in love with the beautiful maiden Nimrodel, a Sylvan elf who resented the Sindar and Noldor, blaming them for the wars that now plagued Middle-earth. Despite Amroth being Sindar, Nimrodel returned his love, but even so refused to marry him unless they left for a new land where they could truly live in peace. Since this was no longer possible in Middle-earth, Amroth agreed to give up his kingship and travel to Elelond in Gondor, where they could board a ship to the undying lands of the west. Yet the journey proved difficult, and they became separated, causing Amroth to arrive first at the shore, where he awaited his beloved aboard a ship ready to depart. Unfortunately for the couple, a storm forced the ship to suddenly set sail, leaving Amroth so horrified he threw himself into the sea and drowned trying to reach the shore. As for the fate of Nimrodel, none can be certain, as she was lost to history after reaching Elelond to learn Amroth and the ship were gone. With the king dead, leadership in Lothlorien fell to the Sinda Celeborn and Noldo Galadriel, while other Sylvan or Wood Elves lived in the Greenwood Forest under the Sinda king Thranduil. Founded as a refuge for the Noldor elves of Eregion, Imladris, also known as Rivendell, continued to be ruled by Elrond Half-Elven, who in the year 109 of the Third Age married Celebrian, daughter to the Lord and Lady of Lothlorien. Celebrian then gave birth to twin sons, Elladan and Elrohir, in 130 TA, while their younger sister Arwen came into the world a century later in 241 TA. By the year 492, some of the Easterlings at last felt prepared to strike out against their enemies, resulting in 2 invasions of Gondor within a 60-year period. Though the fighting went back and forth at times, the Dúnedain proved too powerful and steadily pushed them back, with King Tarostar changing his name to Romendakil, meaning East Victor, after a great triumph in 500 TA. For 4 decades, the Easterlings appeared defeated until they launched yet another invasion in the year 541, scoring a great victory by killing the king Romendakil on the battlefield. Yet his son Turambar continued the fight even more fiercely than his father, and by 550 TA pushed the Easterlings back beyond the Sea of Rhûn to claim their lands for Gondor. Having defeated the invaders and established the Eastlands, the Kingdom of Gondor was reaching new heights of power, while their kinsmen in Arnor were headed towards civil unrest. Following the death of King Earendur in 861 TA, his 3 sons went to war over the inheritance, with the oldest claiming the realm of Arthedain, while his brothers founded the kingdoms of Cardolan and Rhudaur. Coming to power in the year 913, King Eärnil of Gondor spent his reign continuing a policy of expansion, and so built a great fleet used to conquer the city of Umbar in 933 TA. Unfortunately, Eärnil was lost at sea a few years later, leaving his son Kiriandil as king during a time of war, meaning he spent most of his reign defending their conquest of Umbar from the Black Númenóreans and their Haradrim supporters. Kiriandil was ultimately killed during a siege of the city in 1015 TA, and so his son Hirmendakil began his reign determined to end the southern threat. Throughout the years of the Third Age, the Valar grew increasingly concerned Sauron might still pose a threat, as his light force was connected to the One Ring of Power, which was lost but never destroyed. Although elves, men, and dwarves were able to unite and defeat the Dark Lord during the Second Age, most believed the threat was gone, and so would be unprepared for his return. When the Valar first descended from the Timeless Halls, they took mastery over the world, shaping it as they desired in preparation for the awakening of the children, unique and intelligent beings created by Eru Ilúvatar. When the first Dark Lord waged his wars, poisoning their labors and threatening the children, the Valar felt compelled to offer their protection, marching their armies to war. Yet they soon realized that direct interference resulted in drastic repercussions felt all across the world. Though their strength was indeed sufficient to defeat and destroy the first Dark Lord Melkor, it also led to the reshaping of continents, causing countless deaths and mass devastation. Since Sauron was nowhere near as powerful as his master Melkor, and had already been defeated by the children on their own, the Valar felt it unwise to involve themselves directly, and instead created the Istari, a team of 5 Maiar in the form of elderly wizards, tasked with organizing and preparing Middle-earth for their war against the Second Dark Lord. Knowing that Sauron was once a faithful Maia, just like the Istari, the Valar understood the temptations awaiting them, as they would be surrounded by beings incapable of magic, and so could easily use their powers to make themselves kings. Increasing this threat even more was the possibility that an Istari might come to possess the One Ring and succumb to its corruption, becoming yet another Dark Lord seeking the conquest of Middle-earth. In order to minimize this threat, the Valar forbid the Istari from overt use of their powers, or facing the Dark Lord directly, and had them take the form of elderly men so they could speak to elves, humans, and dwarves as equals. Arriving around the year 1000, the Blue Wizards Alatar and Palando took charge over the east of Middle-earth, joined briefly by the White Wizard and leader of their order, Saruman, who then returned west, where he worked with Gandalf the Grey to foster and maintain alliances. Gandalf was the wisest of the Istari, but also the most humble and mild-mannered, learning compassion from the Valaniena, Lady of Mercy. In order to prepare for their mission, Gandalf spent centuries wandering around Middle-earth, getting to know its people, and in doing so learned about their history and politics, making many friends and contacts, which later proved crucial for victory. The final wizard, Radagast the Brown, was sent on behalf of the Vala Yavanna, and so dedicated himself to the preservation of wildlife, only participating in the affairs of his colleagues when absolutely necessary. As the decades went on, and the Istari spread throughout Middle-earth, a strange evil took possession of Amon sunk, forcing the Wood Elves to relocate further north, where they built Elven King's Hall. Renamed Dol Guldur, the former Elven stronghold came to be ruled by a being called the Necromancer, whose corruption spread throughout the Greenwood, henceforth named Mirkwood. Though no one knew it at the time, the Necromancer was Sauron, who needed a base of operations to assemble his servants and send them on missions to weaken their enemies wherever possible. Fearing the evil spreading throughout the forests, many of those living in the area migrated away, like the Harfoot clan of the Hobbit people, who left the Valley of the Anduin to cross the mountains and settle in Eriador. As the centuries went on, they were joined by other Hobbit clans, like the Fallowhides and Stewars, with most eventually settling in and around the Shire. Meanwhile, in the lands of men, the Dúnedain achieved a lasting victory against the Haradrim of the south when King Kiriaher emerged from Umbar and led his forces to conquer their last great enemy, bringing Gondor to the height of its power and peak of their golden age. Renamed Tir-Mendakil, meaning South Victor, the last of the great ship kings, ruled until his death in 1149 and was succeeded by his son, Atanatar II, a man who cared nothing for the administration of the realm and spent his life delighting in the power and wealth he inherited. Due to his neglect, the golden age of Gondor soon came to an end, and their influence slowly began to diminish. Much like Atanatar II, his son and heir, Narmakil, had no interest in ruling over the realm. However, they were fortunate to have his nephew, Minalcar, a promising administrator and military commander who was named regent and given charge over the kingdom. Learning of a rebellion in the east, Minalcar worked with the Northman tribes of Rovanien, living in and around the Greenwood Forest, to put it down. After defeating the Easterlings, Minalcar changed his name to Romendakil and returned home, having made a number of new friendships and alliances with the men of the north. 2 years later, in 1250 TA, the regent sent his son Balakar as an ambassador to live under Vidugavia, the self-titled king of Rovanien, leader of their largest tribe. When King Narmakil died childless decades later in 1294, his younger brother Kalmakil inherited the throne, but was too old for the position, and so left his son Romendakil as regent, until he too passed away in 1304. Though he had been ruling Gondor for over 50 years, Romendakil at last inherited the title of king, which he held until his death in 1366. Although the Dúnedain of Gondor were emerging from a golden age of prosperity, their kin in Arnor were not faring as well, having divided into 3 realms, constantly at war. Taking advantage of this vulnerability, a being known as the Witch King of Angmar established himself in the fortress of Carndum, gathering an army of orcs and hillmen, all the while using spies and informants to keep Arnor divided. Though many feared the threat he posed, none knew he was the leader of the Nazgul and the lieutenant of Sauron, who disappeared for over 1,000 years after the Wars of the Second Age. Now settled in Dol Guldur, Sauron began his long-term strategy of weakening the Dúnedain in anticipation of his return to power. The Witch King, therefore, established himself in the north with the goal of utterly destroying the realms of Arnor. When King Argaleb inherited the rule of Arthedain, there was a brief hope that peace might follow, as the royal lines of Cardolan and Rhudaur were no more, meaning he was the last descendant of Isildur, with a claim over the entire kingdom. Yet while Cardolan recognized this reality and accepted his rule, Rhudaur was led by servants of the Witch King, who refused and pledged themselves allies of Angmar. Sending their combined forces to face the armies of Arthedain in the Battle of the Weather Hills, the Witch King achieved a great victory, killing King Argaleb. However, his son and heir, Arvaleg, continued the struggle, gaining reinforcements from Cardolan and their elven allies in Lindon to push back the enemy and retake the Weather Hills. Forming a defensive line in case of another attack, the Witch King momentarily halted his advance south and moved east, laying siege to Rivendell in the hopes of crushing this ally of his enemy before they could join in the war effort. Although the elves emerged victorious when Lord Elrond brought reinforcements from Lothlorien to help lift the siege, the Witch King's larger strategy succeeded as he distracted the elves and prevented them from sending aid to Arnor. With the Eastern Elves busy fighting in Rivendell, the Witch King next sought to eliminate Arthedain's greatest ally, and so sent an army against the frontline forces at Al-Mansul in 1409, while another host attacked Cardolan directly. Achieving another great victory, the forces of Angmar succeeded in killing both the Prince of Cardolan and King Arvaleg of Arthedain, in addition to capturing Amansul, pushing towards Fornost, occupying Rudaur, and conquering all of Cardolan, save for the capital city of Tirngorthad. Yet this was as far as the Witch King's forces could extend, and they soon faced the elves of Lindon, who joined young King Arafor of Arthedain in a counter-offensive, pushing back the enemy at Fornost and liberating Amansul. Lord Elrond then arranged for more reinforcements from Lothlorien, which combined with those from Lindon to attack Angmar and strike a blow so devastating it took centuries to recover. Though they survived the invasion, Arnor was a shadow of their former selves, with Rudaur gone and Cardolan on the verge of collapse. While the realms of Arnor recovered from the Angmar War, Gondor entered its own period of struggle as they continued to fall from the heights of their golden age. Living among the Northmen of Rhovanion for years, Balakar, son and heir to King Romendekil II, married the chieftain's daughter Vidumavi and had a son they named Eldakar. Wishing to remain on good terms with the kingdom of Rhovanion, Romendekil blessed their union, but trouble soon followed when Balakar returned to Gondor and was publicly seen with a foreign bride and household. Outraged, the blood of Dunedain kings was being diluted with that of common men. Castamir the usurper, a captain of ships and cousin to the ruler, started gathering support for his own faction, finding great success in Umbar and southern Gondor. Though small-scale rebellions arose during the reign of Balakar, his death in 1432 led to a full-on civil war when his half-blood son Eldakar inherited the throne. Engaging in the kin strife, Eldakar proved himself a valiant warrior, every bit the equal of his full-blooded father, yet by 1437 he was overwhelmed by enemies, resulting in the death of his son and burning of the capital Osgiliath. Evading capture, Eldakar escaped to his mother's people in Rhovanion, where he spent the next 10 years gathering an army of Northmen and loyalists from northern Gondor, while Castamir reigned as a cruel tyrant, increasingly loathed by the people, who then flocked to the exiled king's banner when he returned to take the throne. Engaging in the Battle of the Crossings of Erue, many of Gondor's best men lost their lives, but in the end, Eldakar emerged victorious, slaying his rival Castamir in single combat. Defeated, the usurper's sons retreated with their navy to Pelargir, and then Umbar further south, where they found support from the Black Númenóreans and had a dream of the region to establish an independent lordship. Becoming known as the Corsairs of Umbar, their descendants never abandoned their hatred for Gondor and continued to raid their settlements whenever possible. Though Eldakar won the Civil War, ruled until his death in 1490, and was succeeded by his son Aldemir, victory came at a heavy cost, losing so many Dunedain that migration from Rhovanion was encouraged to restore their population. This in turn led to the diluting of their bloodlines and the gradual lessening of the divine blessings bestowed upon those descended from the Númenóreans. Struggling to keep his grasp on the furthest reaches of the realm, Aldemir led his armies south in 1540 and lost his life in battle with the rebelling kings of Arad and their Umbar allies. Inheriting the throne of Gondor, Vinyarion set out with an army to avenge his father, and after winning a great victory, took the name Hirmendekil. After his death in 1621, the throne went to his son Minardil, who just a few years later, in 1643, decided to visit southern Gondor. Hearing about his journey, Angamaite and Sangahyando, the grandsons of Castamir, set out from Umbar to launch a devastating raid against Pelargir, murdering the king and pillaging the city. Though he ruled for only a few years, it was under King Minardil that the House of Húrin grew to prominence, when Húrin of Emin Arnan was appointed steward of Gondor. A faithful servant of the crown, Húrin worked tirelessly for the realm and made such a name for himself that the title Steward of Gondor became a hereditary position for the men of his house. In response to the tragic death of Minardil, his son and successor Telemnar set to work building a fleet to attack Umbar, but the campaign was undone when a terrible plague arose in the east to spread across the lands of the west. Likely sent by Sauron, the plague coincided with the shadow deepening over Mirkwood and began by ravaging the Sea of Rhûn before moving west to Rhovanion, Gondor, Eriador, and beyond. Though they all suffered greatly, Rhovanion was the hardest hit, losing roughly half their population, while Gondor was next, losing the king, his children, and the White Tree, weakening the realm to such an extent they abandoned the towers guarding Mordor and moved the capital from Osgiliath to Minas Anor. Continuing its path of destruction north towards Arnor, Cardolan lost the last of their people to the plague, and Angmar prevented resettlement by sending undead Barrow-wights to haunt the land. One of the only realms of men in the west to be spared the full brunt of this terrible plague were the hillmen called Dunlendings, as they had little contact with outsiders. After the death of Telemnar and his heirs, the throne of Gondor was inherited by the king's nephew, Terrondor, who planted a second white tree in the new capital of Minas Anor. Dedicating his reign to the recovery of Gondor, Terrondor was followed by his son Telúmatar, who felt their strength was sufficient to take vengeance upon Umbar for the death of his great-grandfather and their constant raids on the southern half of the realm. Achieving a great victory in 1810, Gondor captured Umbar, expelled the Corsairs, and slayed the last of Castamir's descendants. To commemorate his success, Telúmatar added Umbardakil to his name, meaning victor over Umbar. Following the death of the king in 1850 and the succession of his son, Narmakil II, Gondor once again found themselves at war, this time facing the Wainriders, a powerful Easterling tribe whose chieftains rode chariots into battle. Encouraged by the emissaries of Sauron, the Wainriders invaded eastern Gondor in 1851, and in response, Narmakil II gathered a great army, reinforced by their remaining allies in Rhovanion, to engage in the Battle of the Plains. Unprepared for the might of the Wainriders, Gondor lost their king in the fighting and suffered a terrible defeat, retreating back to the Anduin River. Not only did Gondor surrender their eastern territories, but their efforts distracted them from the defense of Umbar, which was eventually recaptured by the Haradrim. Their defeat also meant they could no longer protect their Rhovanian allies, leaving them to be enslaved by the victorious Wainriders. Outraged by the death of the king, his son and successor, Telúmatar, started gathering another army for battle when he received a message from the Northman Marwini, a descendant of the kings of Rhovanion, who now ruled over the Eotheod, survivors he led into western Mirkwood. Marwini warned that Wainriders would be raiding Calenardon, and that if Gondor was able to engage them in battle, the Eotheod would rise up to join them. Seeking to take advantage of this offer, Telúmatar marched his army to Dagorlad, where he engaged and defeated the Wainriders with the aid of Marwini and his Northmen rebels. Halting the advance of the Easterlings, Gondor and Rhovanion won a few decades of relative peace, as did Arabal, king of Arthedain in Arnor, who upon seeing the power of Angmar once again on the rise, gathered an army of men, reinforced by elves from Lindon and Rivendell, to attack and defeat the enemy in 1851. Although both Gondor and Arnor achieved important victories, their joy was short-lived, and soon enough the attacks continued, leading some to start questioning how it was they were facing so many enemies, as if perhaps there was a greater power coordinating the downfall of their kingdoms. Over 2,000 years after the destruction of their homeland, the kingdoms founded by the surviving Dunedain of Numenor were severely weakened and surrounded by enemies. Winning a few decades of peace between wars, King Ondahur of Gondor married his daughter Firiel to Prince Arvedwig, son of the King of Arthedain in Arnor, hoping their renewed bond of friendship might increase their defensive capabilities. Yet this alliance ultimately did little good, as the Dark Lord Sauron plotted in the shadows to undermine their efforts and destroy both kingdoms. Still weak from his defeat at the end of the Second Age, Sauron recovered his strength in Dol Guldur while his servants carried out his will, with some moving east to visit the Wainriders, who failed in their most recent attempt to invade Gondor. Encouraging them to build up their forces once more, the Wainriders traveled south of Mordor to befriend the men of Khand and Nir Harad, other enemies of Gondor with their own scores to settle. Coordinating their efforts, the Easterling and Southron Alliance attacked the Kingdom of Gondor from both the north and south in 1944 TA. Fortunately, the Lord of the Eotheod, an ally to Gondor, spotted the enemy approaching and sent a warning to King Ondahur, who around the same time also heard about an invasion in the south, and so prepared to face the enemy on two fronts. Splitting up his forces, General Eärnil, a relative of the king, led a smaller army south, while Ondahur and his eldest son Artemir took the larger host north.
Wishing to secure the succession in case they did not return, the king ordered his youngest son Faramir to stay behind as regent, while the rest marched to the Battle of Morannon, where Onderher led the center, his nephew Minotaur commanded the right wing, and the noble Prince Ardrahil was charged with the left. Yet the men of Gondor were not expecting the Wainriders to be so eager for vengeance, riding their chariots and horses with all haste to unexpectedly descend upon the king's army, cutting them down in a savage attack. Destroying their center ranks, both King Onderher and his son Artamir were killed, leaving Minotaur of the right flank in command of their forces. Despite being on the verge of defeat, the news somehow got worse when the Lord of the Eotheod informed the general that Prince Faramir, youngest son of the king and regent of Gondor, who was supposed to be safe in Minas Anor, was killed in the fighting. Unwilling to remain behind while his family went to war, Faramir disobeyed his father and wore a disguise to infiltrate the army, fighting with the Eotheod and dying during an attack in the Dead Marshes. Finding little time to mourn, General Minotaur was then attacked and slain by the Wainriders, leaving the last of their forces under the command of Prince Ardrahil, though they too were eventually defeated, allowing the Easterlings to proudly declare victory and begin a raucous celebration. Losing the greater part of their forces in the north, Eadmil and his host faced difficult odds in the south, as the men of Khand and Nir Harad swept in from the east to capture Umbar, thereby cutting off any possible support from their allies in that region. The enemy then moved north to attack Ithilien, where their advance was at last halted and forced into retreat by the army of Eadmil. Hearing about the loss of their king in the disaster of the Morannon, Eadmil wasted no time after their victory and immediately marched to face the Wainriders in the north, only to find them drunk, merry, and utterly distracted. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Eadmil charged against them in the Battle of the Camp, vanquishing the enemy and ending the immediate threat. Despite their alliance, no aid came from Arthedain during the invasion of Gondor, as the last realm of Arnor was busy trying to keep the forces of Angmar in the north from overrunning their defenses. Though the kingdom of Arnor was once a large and powerful realm, centuries of division and war left them a shell of their former selves, relying on military aid from the elves of Lindon and Rivendell to survive. Yet the monarch Araphant was not only the ruler of Arnor, but as a direct descendant of Isildur, was also High King of the Dunedain, and so had some sway over all their people. Therefore, when the question of succession arose in Gondor, following the death of the king and his sons, Araphant's heir, Arvidue, who was married to Firiel, last surviving child of Onderher, submitted himself as a candidate to rule and one day unify the kingdoms. But the people of Gondor rejected his offer, as they recognized the weakness of Arnor and no longer considered them an equal power, instead choosing the war hero Eadmil as their new king. Ruling with wisdom and humility, Eadmil sent a letter to Arvidue upon his ascension, thanking Arnor for their friendship and promising to send aid when possible. As the soldiers of Arnor continued to struggle in holding back the Witch King of Angmar, events finally came to a breaking point in 1974 when the enemy army overran Arthedain's defenses and conquered the capital of Fornos. Bringing whatever heirlooms he could, King Arvidue, who inherited the throne upon the death of his father, gathered his people and fled to create a defensive position in the North Downs. Yet once again, the armies of Angmar were upon them, and so the monarch led his people to take refuge in the Blue Mountains, while his son Aranarth, having been cut off from his father during the fall of Fornost, went west to seek assistance from the elf lord Círdan of Lindon, who immediately sent a ship to search for his ally. Running out of supplies, Arvidue had no choice but to leave the Blue Mountains and find the Losoth, also known as the Snowmen of Forokel, an ancient tribe of humans descended from the Forod wife of the First Age, who adapted to living in the cold. When the threat of Angmar arose in the Third Age, the Losoth migrated to the Cape of Forokel, where the enemy could not follow. Desperate for food and shelter, King Arvidue approached the primitive people and offered jewels of great value for their aid. But the Losoth had no interest in such things, and instead helped them out of pity and fear for their weapons. When the elves of Lindon at last arrived on a great ship to rescue the king, the Losoth were astounded, as they knew nothing of sailing technology. Hoping to convince Arvidue to stay until the Witch King was defeated, the chieftain warned that boarding this sea monster would bring about calamity calamity, but the ruler was determined to return south and continue the struggle. To thank the Losot for their assistance, the king gifted them the Ring of Barahir, a priceless heirloom from the First Age, passed down through the noble houses of the Edain. Unfortunately, the Losot were correct in their prediction, and the elves were struck by a terrible ice storm on the return journey, resulting in the destruction of their ship, the death of the king, and the loss of great Numenorian heirlooms like two of the Palantiri. Learning that his father was lost, Aranar inherited the rule of Arnor, only to realize his kingdom no longer existed. Therefore, he did not take the title of king, and instead, as a descendant of Isildur through his father and Anarion through his mother, declared himself chieftain of the Dunedain, gathering whatever soldiers of Arnor remained to create the Rangers of the North, a band of elite warriors dedicated to waging a long-term war against the dark armies throughout their former lands and beyond. The children and families of these rangers, along with the heirlooms they still possessed, went to Rivendell, where they lived under the protection of Lord Elrond, who shared kinship with the royal house of the Dunedain. Hearing about Angmar's invasion, King Eadnil of Gondor started gathering a host under the command of his son Eadnur to march north and help his allies, but they arrived too late, finding Arnor destroyed and their king dead. Making contact with the elves of Lindon and rangers of Aranath, Gondor formed a coalition army that even included a company of hobbit archers from the Shire and marched upon Angmar, hoping to claim vengeance for the loss of Arnor and finally end the northern threat. Meeting at the Battle of Fornost, the Witch King was confident in victory and initiated the attack, only to be overwhelmed by the enemy and forced into retreat. Falling back to Angmar, the Witch King was further troubled when an army from Rivendell arrived, led by the powerful Glorfindel, to aid the alliance. With his forces destroyed and his realms beset by enemies, the Witch King stepped forth to personally do battle with Eadnur of Gondor, but his look and presence was so terrifying, Eadnur's horse frightened and fled with the prince on his back. Laughing and mocking the flight of his adversary, the Witch King was soon silenced by Glorfindel, who charged and attacked with such fury. The ruler of Angmar also fled the battle, disappearing into the shadows. Though Eadnur wished to pursue, Glorfindel claimed it was useless, as his death lay elsewhere, saying, "He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man shall he fall." Though he suffered a defeat and was unable to permanently establish the realm of Angmar, the Witch King succeeded in his primary mission of destroying Arnor, thereby leaving a weakened Gondor as the last kingdom of the Dunedain. Now ready to focus his attention south, the Witch King journeyed to Mordor, where he reunited with the other Nazgul and formed a new army, which they used to besiege Minas Ithil in 2000 TA. Within 2 years, they captured the city and its great treasures, including another of the Palantiri. Changing the city's name to Minas Morgul, it became home to the Witch King, while Gondor's capital of Minas Anor was renamed Minas Tirith, meaning Tower of the Guard. After the death of Eadnil in 2043, his son Eadnur inherited the throne, and while he was known as a warrior of great renown, this also meant he felt deeply embarrassed that his horse made him flee from combat against the Witch King. Taking advantage of his warrior's pride, the Nazgul leader sent out a message following his capture of Minas Morgul, challenging Eadnur to single combat. Realizing this was a terrible idea, the steward of Gondor convinced the king to refuse, but when the Witch King issued the challenge again 7 years later, Eadnur could not be restrained, riding with a small party of companions into Minas Morgul, never to be seen again. Before his departure, he visited the Hallows, where nobility were buried, and left the crown of Gondor upon the lap of a statue of his father, where it remained for 1,000 years, as no new king was chosen, with power instead given to Mardil Varonwe of the House of Húrin, who was named ruling steward, meaning he and his descendants were to lead Gondor until the return of the king. Following the devastating conclusion of the centuries-long Angmar War, the Dunedain realm of Arnor was gone, while Gondor, still united but greatly diminished in power, became the new target of the Witch King, who began another centuries-long campaign in the south. Yet for some at least, the defeat of Angmar, continued protection of the Rangers, and withdrawal of the Nazgul leader meant a respite from the years of terror which gripped this region of the continent.
2 years after the Witch King's retreat south, the Aotheod, living between the Misty Mountains and Mirkwood, at last felt they could safely move their people, establishing Framsburg in the Grey Mountains, while in 1979, the Hobbits of the Shire, formerly subjects of Arnor, elected Becca of the Marsh to rule their lands as an independent realm. Becca brought them years of peace and prosperity, with the Shire becoming such an idyllic place for their people. They became deeply isolationist and largely neutral to all outside conflicts. Those who descended from Becca of the Marsh were of the Old Buck clan, which later became the Brandybucks, producing such heroes like Meriadoc Brandybuck, one of the 9 companions in the Fellowship of the Ring. Yet while the hobbits thrived in this new world, the dwarves of Durin's folk faced their greatest loss to date. Waking during the years of the trees in Mount Gundabad, between the Grey and Misty Mountains, Durin the Deathless, eldest of the 7 fathers of the dwarven race, journeyed south and founded the realm of Khazad-dûm, where his people and descendants thrived for thousands of years. The adopted children of Ilúvatar, the dwarves were originally created by the Vala Aule the Smith, and so possessed an innate love of precious jewels, working as miners to extract wealth from their mountain home. Discovering mithril, a substance stronger than steel but lighter and more beautiful, they continued to delve deeper into the Misty Mountains throughout the First and Second Ages, until the year 1980 of the Third Age, when they awoke a Balrog of Morgoth. Maiar fire spirits born before the creation of the world, the Balrogs chose to follow the first Dark Lord, Morgoth, serving as his loyal warriors and protectors throughout the years of his rule. When Morgoth was defeated and expelled from the world, the Balrogs who survived went to sleep deep underground, where no more was heard from them until the awakening of Durin's Bane in the Misty Mountains, who wrought terror upon the Longbeard clan of Khazad-dûm. Waging war on the beasts, the dwarves lost many, including their king Durin VI and his successor King Nine I, forcing them to abandon their ancestral homeland and seek refuge in the Grey Mountains of the north. Renamed Moria, meaning the Black Pit, Khazad-dûm was left entirely to the Balrog, where he remained for centuries as a nameless terror, inspiring fear in neighboring lands. Since Sauron was only a Maya, like Durin's Bane, and nowhere near as powerful as their former master Morgoth, none can say whether the second Dark Lord might have convinced the Balrog to join him, but it is possible they at least had some form of contact or alliance, as only the orcs and other servants of Sauron were permitted to populate his realm. Unfortunately, while both the Aotheod and Longbeards migrated to the Grey Mountains seeking peace, they were plagued by further conflict and death. No strangers to these lands, Durin's folk settled the Grey Mountains thousands of years earlier and held colonies in Erebor and the Iron Hills. But as was so often the case, the extraordinary wealth they mined from the mountains brought about their downfall when it attracted the attention of Skala the Worm, a dragon which resided in the northern wastes. Attacking the dwarves, Skala took their home and treasure, forcing them into flight, and many years later in the Third Age still resided in the mountains, an ever-present threat to the Aotheod and Longbeards in the area. Rising to the challenge, the hero Fram, son to the Lord of the Aotheod, made his way into the beast's lair and slayed the mighty dragon before removing its teeth as a war prize. Claiming the treasure for the Aotheod, Fram was hailed as a hero by his people, but was soon vilified by the dwarves when they demanded he return the wealth stolen by the dragon long ago. Refusing to give them what he earned, he instead sent them the teeth of the dragon, along with a note that read, "Jewels such as these you will not match in your treasuries, for they are hard to come by." Outraged by what they saw as an insult and mockery, the dwarves responded with violence, killing the hero Fram, and may have taken back a share of their treasure, though the Aotheod retained some as well. In the year 1999, King Thrain of Durin's folk brought their people to Erebor and established the kingdom under the mountain as their new homeland. Once again, they went to work extracting the wealth of the mountain, becoming so prosperous the nearby town of Dale was established by Northmen seeking trade with the dwarves. The most precious of all the jewels they found was the Arkenstone, a shimmering gemstone unlike any other, which became a symbol and heirloom for the royal family. Some have theorized that this precious jewel was in fact one of the 3 Silmarils, crafted by Feanor in the Years of the Trees, later stolen by Morgoth, and through a series of extraordinary events and tragedies, left one in the hands of Maedhros, eldest son of Feanor. Sickened by all the acts of great evil he'd committed for his prize, and plagued by a constant pain from the jewel burning his hand, he finally ended his misery by throwing himself and the Silmaril into a fiery chasm. With so much war and chaos in the lands of Middle-earth, and great darkness overtaking Mirkwood, Gandalf the Grey, an Istari wizard from Valinor sent to help defeat Sauron, suspected the necromancer of Dol Guldur may in fact be the second Dark Lord, and so went to investigate in 2063, only to find it empty, as Sauron fled east to escape notice. Thanks to this event, the people of the West were given a respite from his schemes, leading to a period of roughly 4 centuries, called the Watchful Peace, where many of the hostilities fueled by the Dark Lord were halted. Yet this was only a facade, as Sauron was increasing his strength by rallying the men of the East, while the Nazgul continued on in the West, working in the shadows to breed more orcs, trolls, and other monsters, with the Witch King reigning in Minas Morgul, while Kamul the Easterling was given charge over Dol Guldur. Finished with his work in the East, Sauron secretly returned to Dol Guldur in 2460, and just a few years later, in 2463, Lady Galadriel called for the forming of a White Council, consisting of the available Istari and Great Elven Lords, who selected Gandalf the Grey as their leader. But Gandalf, ever the humble and independent spirit, declined the offer, allowing for Saruman the White to be given the honor. Saruman, a wise and powerful wizard, was also prideful and forever resented Gandalf for being the Council's first choice. As fate would have it, in this same year, the One Ring of Power and ultimate prize, so coveted by Sauron, missing for nearly 2,500 years, was finally found by the Stour hobbit Deagle as he fished the Anduin River. Fishing alongside his friend Smeagol, who was celebrating a birthday, the two quickly got into an argument as each tried to claim the ring. As both men were relatively greedy and selfish hobbits, the ring corrupted them almost immediately and led to a frenzied fight, ending with Smeagol killing Deagle before fleeing into the mountains with the ring. Completely unknown to the outside world, Smeagol lived alone for centuries, seeing his life extended by the power of the ring, but was twisted in both mind and body by its corruption, transforming into a split-personality monster called Gollum, willing to go to any lengths to keep his precious prize. Settling northwest of Mirkwood by 2501 TA, the Eotheod were led by Leod, a great horse trainer, who died after being thrown from the back of a particularly willful and powerful white horse, whose ancestors were said to come from the Undying Lands of the West, brought by the Vala Orome who traveled throughout Middle-earth. Succeeded by his son Eorl, the 16-year-old lord tracked down the horse, demanding that it give up its freedom as payment for his father's death. The extraordinary horse, who some say could understand human speech, agreed and became Eorl's faithful companion for the rest of his life. Named Felaroth, meaning very strong, he became the father of the Mearas, the greatest horses of the Northmen, reserved exclusively for their rulers. Among Felaroth's descendants were Snowmane, the steed of King Theoden, who fought in the War of the Ring, and Shadowfax, a grey mare chosen by the wizard Gandalf, the only known Mearas given to someone outside the royal line. Further south, in 2509, Celebrian, wife of Elrond, took a trip to visit her parents, Galadriel and Celeborn, in Lothlorien when she was attacked by orcs, taken captive, poisoned, and cruelly tortured. Learning what occurred, her sons Elladan and Elrohir charged to her rescue, slayed the enemy, and returned her to Rivendell, where she was physically healed, but the emotional and psychological damage proved too much, and so she said goodbye to her family and set sail for the Undying Lands of the
the west. A year later, in 2510 TA, Gondor faced yet another invasion from the Easterlings, this time facing the Balkoth faction, possible descendants of the Wainriders, who waged their own war of conquest centuries earlier. Serving the interests of Sauron in Dol Guldur, the Balkoth were supported by the Orcs of the Misty Mountains, resulting in the invasion of Calenardon from two sides. Fallen far from the strength they once held, Gondor's population in this region was low, and their garrisons minimal, allowing the Balkoth and Orcs to quickly defeat and surround the Northern Army, while positioning themselves to hold back their southern reinforcements. Yet just as all hope seemed lost, their old allies, the Eotheod, arrived, responding to the Red Arrow, a symbol carried by a messenger of Gondor, which meant they were asking for military aid. After defeating enemy forces in the Battle of the Field of Celebrant, the Eotheod joined the northern and southern armies of Gondor in expelling the Orcs and Easterlings from the province. With the war won, Gideon, steward of Gondor, rewarded the Eotheod for their service by gifting them Calenardon, the lands they fought for, allowing Eorl to move their people south and found the kingdom of Rohan. As part of this arrangement, both leaders swore a sacred oath, binding Gondor and Rohan as eternal allies who would come to each other's aid whenever needed. Using the beacons of Gondor as an initial warning of danger between the realms, the official call for military aid would continue to be a messenger carrying a red arrow. A few decades later, in 2545, the Easterlings renewed their invasion of Rohan, leading to the death of King Eorl and his horse Felaroth in the Battle of the Wold. Succeeding his father, King Brego continued the war, eventually driving the Easterlings from his lands, in addition to defending against Dunlending and Orc advances in the north and west. Bringing some measure of peace to their lands, he built the famed royal hall Medusel in the capital of Edoras, and held a celebration upon its completion. Yet this joy soon turned to tragedy, as the king's son Baldur took the opportunity to announce he would prove his valor by venturing into the paths of the dead. Thousands of years earlier, when Gondor first established their rule, the king of the mountain realm pledged his loyalty, yet when the final battle with Sauron approached, refused to fight and fled with his men into the mountains, surrounding what became the paths of the dead. Furious at their cowardice, Isildur cursed them, keeping their spirits bound to the region until their oaths were fulfilled. Many years later in the Third Age, their ghosts continued to haunt these mountains, and so when Baldur marched forth onto the path, it was lost, never to re-emerge. Heartbroken at the death of his child, King Brego died of grief, leaving his second son Aldor as their ruler. A few decades later, in 2570, the dwarves of Durin's folk faced yet another war to defend their homeland, when the dragons of the north descended upon the Grey Mountains, slaughtering their people and stealing their treasures. Known to target the dwarves due to their wealth, the dragon race was originally created by the Dark Lord Morgoth in the First Age, and after his defeat retreated north, where they bred new generations of their species. Attracted to treasure, these dragons would occasionally leave their lands to prey upon the peoples of the south, specifically targeting the 7 dwarven clans, as they lived in mountains and excelled as miners, collecting vast quantities of gold, mithril, and precious gems. Yet even so, regular dragon attacks did not become a serious problem until Sauron gave 7 magic rings to the 7 kings of the dwarves, a gift designed to enslave their people to the second Dark Lord's will, but ultimately failed as they were resistant to such influence. Yet in one aspect, the rings did cause harm, as they enhanced both the natural abilities and desires of their wearers. Since the dwarven kings already loved mining for treasure, the rings brought about obsession, gathering vast hordes of wealth, unlike anything they'd ever seen before. This greed then attracted the dragons, who laid waste to their homelands, destroying or consuming 4 of the 7 rings of power. Sauron, in turn, was able to recover 2 more, leaving the last one with the king of the Longbeard clan. Suffering their own hardships over the years, Durin's folk lost their homeland to the Balrog of Moria, and thus were split up, eventually settling in the Grey Mountains, Erebor, and Iron Hills. In the year 2210, King Thorin I called for their people to be reunited, choosing the Grey Mountains as their home.
Yet the concentration of wealth in one area and proximity to the far north made them too tempting a target. And so in 2570, the war began, with dragons sweeping in to rain down destruction. Although the dwarves fiercely resisted, possessing a natural resistance to heat, which aided them in battle with some forms of dragon. In 2589, their king Dain I and his son Thror were killed by a cold drake, leaving Thror to inherit leadership and lead the retreat. Breaking up once more, some of Durin's folk followed the king to settle in Erebor, while others went with his brother Gror to the Iron Hills. Ruled by Gondor for thousands of years, Isengard was home to Orthanc, a 500-foot-tall impenetrable tower built by the Dunedain, where they might store many of the treasures brought from the kingdom of Numenor. As their power declined and the northern population dwindled, most significantly after the Great Plague of 1636, Gondor withdrew resources from the region, closing Orthanc and sending its keys to the capital of Minas Tirith. Despite the difficult circumstances, they attempted to retain control by creating the hereditary title Lord of Isengard and charging this noble line with maintaining a permanent garrison outside the tower. For many years, this worked well, but as Gondor's influence continued to lessen, the people of Isengard developed friendships with the Dunlendings of the West, relatively primitive hillmen considered enemies of the Dunedain. When Gondor withdrew their people from Calenardon, it was the Dunlendings who moved in to settle the land, intermixing with whoever remained. Yet they acted without Gondor's permission, and so when the land was later given to the Northmen, they founded the kingdom of Rohan, uprooting and driving the Dunlendings back into the west. While Rohan went on to enjoy a golden age of prosperity, the Dunlendings now considered them mortal enemies, further strengthening their relations with the men of Isengard, who shared a disdain for the Northmen. Yet even so, Isengard remained loyal to Gondor for many more years, until a combination of events led to their downfall. Not only did the Lord of Isengard's bloodline end without heirs, but the stewards of Gondor lost all interest in this faraway colony, no longer checking up on them at all. Now ruled by a council of the highest-ranking Dunedain warriors, the population of Isengard further intermixed with the Dunlendings, allowing them to settle outside the walls. Events then culminated in 2710, when the Dunlendings seized control of Isengard, killing any remaining loyalists who refused to surrender. As Gondor was unable to spare any of their forces, Isengard became a Dunlending realm, openly hostile to the Horse Lords of Rohan, who were on the decline from their golden age, and so lacked the strength to take them head-on, instead merely sending riders to defend their western holdings. In the coming decades, conflict escalated not only in Rohan, but also Eriador further north, where in 2740 they faced an orc invasion. Fortunately, the warriors called Rangers, descended from the Dunedain of Arnor, continued to patrol and defend their ancient homelands, beating back enemy forces. Yet even so, their victory was incomplete, as a band of orcs, led by King Golfenbull of Mount Graham, slipped past them to find the prosperous realm of the Shire ripe for conquest. Sounding the alarm, Bundabras Took, the legendary hobbit hero, rallied their defenses, resulting in the Battle of the Greenfields in 2747. Despite many centuries of peace in the Shire and little to no combat experience, the hobbits fought valiantly and defeated the orcs, with Bundabras striking off the head of their king. By the following year in 2748, Eriador was largely free of orc influence once more. Returning south, the kingdom of Rohan continued to struggle with Dunlending raids in the west, while also facing domestic troubles at home. Born of mixed Northman and Dunlending blood, the noble Lord Freka made his lands in Adorn rich and prosperous, to the point where he felt no need to attend councils or obey commands from King Helm in Edoras. Claiming descent from King Freywine, who ruled a century earlier, Freka was proud and ambitious, traveling to the capital in 2754 with a retinue of men, hoping to pressure them into arranging a marriage between Helm's daughter and his son Wolf. Yet Helm was a mighty warrior and in no way intimidated, instead rejecting the proposal with insults and disrespect. Enraged, Freka spoke harshly in return, prompting the king to strike him dead with a blow so fierce he earned the nickname Hammerhand.
Upon the death of their leader, Wolf and the men of Adorn were declared enemies of Rohan, leading them to take refuge with the Dunlendings, who accepted them warmly. 4 years later, in 2758, Wolf, son of Freka, was in command of Isengard and ready to take his revenge. Allying with other enemies of Gondor and Rohan, the Corsairs of Umbar and their Haradrim supporters invaded from the south, while Wolf led the Dunlendings of Isengard to war in the north. With Gondor distracted and unable to send reinforcements, Wolf led his people to great victories, winning the Battle of the Fords of Isen before capturing the capital of Edoras, slaying Helm's eldest son, Prince Haleth, and taking the Golden Hall of Meduseld, where he declared himself king. Driven into exile, Helm Hammerhand retreated to the fortress of the Hornburg, where they were besieged. To make matters worse, the region then suffered through 5 months of extreme cold, called the Long Winter, devastating both sides of the conflict. Facing starvation in the Hornburg, Helm's last remaining son Hama led a group of men outside the walls in search of food, but never returned. Devastated by the loss of his kingdom and both sons, Helm Hammerhand dedicated whatever remained of his life to causing as much damage to the enemy as possible, beginning with the psychological impact of blowing a great war horn every night to announce his coming. He then crept out of the Hornburg alone, dressed in white, to stalk and silently kill as many as possible. Night after night, Helm blew the horn and terrorized the enemy camp, until at last he succumbed to famine and cold, freezing to death in a fighting stance. With the southern invasion defeated and Long Winter at an end, Gondor at last sent reinforcements north, where they combined with what remained of Rohan's army hiding in Dunharrow to drive out Dunlending forces. With the ruler and his sons dead, leadership fell to Helm's nephew, Freyalaf, born to his younger sister Hild, another mighty warrior who personally led a raid into Edoras, where he killed King Wolf and liberated the capital. Clearing the land of enemies, the combined armies of Rohan and Gondor laid siege to Isengard and starved out the last remaining Dunlendings, after which the land was given to the wizard Saruman, along with the keys to the Tower Orthanc, in the hopes this powerful ally might help keep Rohan safe in the future. While Saruman concerned himself with the great realms of the south, the wizard Gandalf was more concerned with the state of his hobbit friends in the Shire, and so spent the long winter helping them survive. Thriving under King Thror, the dwarves of Erebor prospered greatly from their mining operations and friendly trade relations with neighboring powers. Yet as was often the case for their people, excessive wealth brought about their doom, attracting the attention of the northern dragons, Smaug the Terrible, who attacked the Lonely Mountain in 2770 TA, claiming their treasure as his own. Fleeing for their lives, some of Durin's folk joined their kin in the Iron Hills, while others followed King Thror to the Dunland Hills, where they lived in poverty and struggled to survive. By 2790, King Thror grew disheartened by the state of his people, and so gifted his son Thrain, the last of the 7 dwarven rings of power, and a map to the Lonely Mountain, before departing on a quest to their ancestral homeland of Khazad-dûm, now called Moria. Despite the danger from the orcs and Durin's bane, Thror proudly marched through the eastern gate alone, while his friend Nar waited for his return. A few days later, Nar learned Thror was captured by the orcs, tortured and beheaded, with the name Azog carved into his forehead. Naming himself the new king of Moria, Azog the Defiler furthered this insult by giving Nar a small bag of coins to serve as a messenger, warning of death for any who ventured onto his lands. As he departed, Nar saw Thror's body hacked into pieces and fed to the crows. Informing Thrain of all that occurred, the new king sat in silence for 7 days before rising furiously to proclaim, "This cannot be borne." Not only did Thrain send for the armies of Durin's folk, but he also called upon the other dwarven clans scattered across Middle-earth, each of whom responded by sending armies to avenge the fallen king. A proud and determined people, they spent the next 3 years gathering their forces before finally invading the Misty Mountains through Mount Gundabad, purging the northern half of the mountains down to the Gladden River.
Excelling in underground combat, the dwarves inflicted massive casualties upon the orcs of the Misty Mountains, but paid a heavy price for their victories, losing over half their army in the fighting. The 6-year campaign ultimately culminated in the Battle of Azanulbazar in 2799, when Lord Nine and his son Dine secured victory for the dwarves by bringing reinforcements from the Iron Hills. Among the many casualties, the king's second son Frerin and kinsman Fundin were killed, while Thrain lost an eye and his first son Thorin was wounded. In the midst of battle, Thorin lost his shield and so used an oaken tree branch to defend himself, earning the nickname Oaken Shield. In their final push against enemy forces, Azog the Defiler fought and killed the Lord of the Iron Hills, only to then be confronted and beheaded by Nine's son Dine Ironfoot. The battle won, the dwarves completed their victory by stuffing the same bag of coins they received from Azog directly into his mouth before fixing his head on a stake. King Thrain, seeing the orc armies destroyed, wanted to continue the war by marching into Moria to reclaim the ancient homeland of Durin's folk, but the dwarves of other clans refused, stating the mission to avenge King Thror was complete, and they would not risk more men for a homeland that was not their own. Even Durin's folk refused to continue after Dine Ironfoot reported that he'd seen the Balrog of Moria waiting for them in the mountain. The war concluded, the Grand Dwarven army disbanded, and the other clans returned to their own lands, while many of Durin's folk followed Lord Dine to the Iron Hills. The rest settled in the Blue Mountains under King Thrain and his son Thorin Oakenshield. In the aftermath of the war, the surviving orcs of the Misty Mountains fled and took refuge in the White Mountains of the south, where they survived by raiding settlements in the nearby realm of Rohan. Oppositely, the defeat of the orcs in the north gave the lands of Eriador many years of peace, though it also led to Azog the Defiler's son, Bold, taking the leadership of Gundabad, where he spent years rebuilding their forces. For 40 years, King Thrain II reigned in the Blue Mountains, growing increasingly desperate to reclaim the riches left behind in their former kingdom. In 2841, Thrain left his son Thorin as leader of their people to embark upon a quest with a small company, including his friends Dwalin and Balin, to explore the Lonely Mountain and see if the danger was still present. Learning of their mission, the Dark Lord Sauron laid a trap, sending beasts and bad weather to eventually force them to take shelter in the forest of Mirkwood, where he sent his agents to capture Thrain in the night. Bringing him to Dol Guldur, they took his ring of power, inflicted torture, and left him to die. Meanwhile, the wizard Gandalf the Grey embarked on a quest to find the vanished king, making his way in secret through Moria to no avail. Eventually, his investigations brought him once again to Dol Guldur, where he found Thrain in a sorry state, half mad and unable to remember his own name. Nevertheless, Gandalf gathered useful information, learning that Sauron was back and seeking the remaining rings of power while posing as the necromancer of Dol Guldur. Summoning the last of his strength, Thrain gave Gandalf the key and map to Erebor before passing away. Gathering the White Council to report his findings, Gandalf urged an immediate attack to destroy Sauron and his forces while still relatively weak, but Saruman disagreed, claiming the Dark
It's not hot. It's been unplugged for like 10 hours.
No, I mean, I opened the back, this, right? Shut up. I opened the back of this, so that the AC can get into there, because it's right fucking there, so I was like, why not use the coldest power source that I have to cool it off?
Fuck.
I mean, once it's turned on from where it is, still, it gets hit, and it's fucking with some heat, and it heats right up. If I raise it up a little bit more, it'll actually have constant, non-stop AC blowing right on me. And then when it gets a little colder outside, I just open the window a little bit. Winter air will fucking keep that shit cold like nobody's business. Okay. I wonder how well this app, my modem, would work on your cell phone. That's something that I was going to use this for. That'd be gangster. A phone that can actually run my Xbox. So my phone can kind of run it, but it's choppy. And it gets really annoying after a minute or two, after like 20 minutes. You're going to try to play an online game that's not happening. Not on your best life. How far do you think Jedi Ray Team, basic Jedi Ray Team, or not Jedi Training Ray, like Galactic Ray, Relic 7, Ray, Relic, why the fuck is Jedi Knight Raven just tossed in there all the time? Or is it a resistance, like the resistance team that you would regularly use in the thing, in the journey, what you do in Galactic? The thing that's Galactic territory battles.
Territory battles?
Yeah. Because every time any character goes below 50% health, she whips up that dirty fucking.
I didn't know there was territory battles on.
Territory battles are up right now. You've never used Galactic Ray in Geonosis light side?
Yes, I have.
That's what I'm talking about. But what you're saying is you've never used that team like that. Okay, I get it.
What team?
The this is Drake beat.
Yes, I've used it. I've beat all 4 phases with
You
it.
just said that you didn't know. Fucking confusing shit out there.
Because I said I didn't know there was the territory battle up.
Oh. Ah.
God damn it.
Did I get those in there? What did I use, a hammer? It's the only way I can see them, but I can't pull that shit out. I'm gonna use these.
Where the fuck? Okay, so I must have him in the other. There's no way I have one. Don't even have one.
It's a goddamn hammer. Where the hammer is?
No. There he is. Oh, god damn it. How do I do this now?
Your thing being down, filtered the motor here is collecting a lot of dust, eh?
What?
And the fan. Like on my fan upstairs, I cut the screen, you know the screen that was here? When the cat was here?
It doesn't bother me.
No, but it will when it collects enough dust that it burns your fan out. It'll take 2 minutes to put a filter on it. I already have the stuff for it, so I don't. It's not like you have to buy anything. The makeshift filter that'll save your fan fucking in here. You sweep the dust with a little thing that I have. Then for shavers, but I clean it out really, really low with like a comb on the water and stuff. Every time that I have to use it, actually on with double-sided tape.
In like 2 weeks, nobody's going to be using a fan.
I'll be using my hallway.
You can, okay, well, that's weird.
Ever since I got on FM, I've had it is way too hot, and I can't deal with oh, your room is different. Your room is the warmest room in the apartment. All year, like.
Only 10 draws at the beginning? Too little. Just click this video to enter the game, and you will get...
Anakin Skywalker is the chosen one, which means his abilities in the Force have the potential to surpass anyone in history. But his powers were not fully gained because he entered the Jedi Temple much later than the ordinary Jedi. But what would change if Anakin was found at birth and brought into the Jedi Order like a normal boy would be? The story begins 9 years before the Phantom Menace, on the planet Tatooine, where we find Shmi Skywalker with her newborn baby. She sits there playing with him, entertaining him in any way she can. This child was her entire world. She would have to raise the boy by herself, as there was no father. No one could explain the pregnancy, there just wasn't an answer. Suddenly, the doors to her home burst open as two hooded figures march in. They explain to Shmi that the boy is special, and he has been blessed with fantastic gifts that will help the galaxy. It was called the Force. Shmi was very reluctant to give the child up, but what choice did she have? She couldn't do anything, and so the boy was taken that night. Unknown to the Jedi at this time, they had just met the Chosen One, destined to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. His name was Anakin Skywalker. Anakin was brought into the Jedi Temple and made a youngling. At first, the Jedi saw lots of potential in Anakin. They took him through the procedures of joining the Order, and he started his lessons with Master Yoda in a room filled with other children. They learned the basics of the Force, lightsabers, and using their abilities to protect others. But everything changed in Anakin's life when the results of his midi-chlorian count came through. His results were off the charts. No one had ever seen a reading like this. At first, they thought it was an error, and so they tested again, only to receive the same results. Anakin possessed more midi-chlorians than even Yoda. It wouldn't be long until the entire Jedi Council deduced that he was the Chosen One. And so he continued training. They kept him with the younglings, but also had private sessions for the boy. He picked up different abilities extremely fast. Others in his class were very jealous of his abilities in the Force. For the next 9 years, Anakin would train, becoming the most gifted and talented youngling the Jedi Order had ever seen. All they could do was to continue to pour information of techniques and ideologies into him. After 9 years of training had passed, Anakin was extremely powerful, more powerful than the average 9-year-old could ever be. Completing his time as a youngling and passing the trials, he was made a Padawan. The Council was very selective when it came to this. They needed a Jedi strong and powerful who could balance Skywalker's skill, but also wise and courageous. Qui-Gon Jinn was that Jedi. Obi-Wan had recently passed the trials, and so Qui-Gon was available to train a new Padawan to become a Jedi Knight. Maul had never been revealed to the Jedi, since they didn't meet him on Tatooine. As time passed and Palpatine met Count Dooku, he came up with the plan to keep Maul hidden away from the Jedi until the perfect moment came to reveal him. And so he trained Count Dooku to become his main apprentice, and Maul hid in the shadows, further fueling his rage and anger towards the Jedi. Qui-Gon taught Anakin everything he knew. When you become a Padawan, it's time to specialize in a lightsaber form. Qui-Gon used Form 4 Ataru. This was a very aggressive and powerful lightsaber form, one that the most experienced Jedi members such as Yoda used. But this form would also be perfect for training Anakin, still a young teenager. The form was great for users using their connection to the Force to help supplement their physical skill and power. With Anakin being the chosen one and the most talented Force user ever, Ataru would be the perfect match for him. And so for the rest of Anakin's teen years, they trained a lot. Going on missions and gaining experience, Anakin truly was a prodigy. His powers had almost tripled under Qui-Gon's training compared to Obi-Wan. In fact, with Qui-Gon's methods, Anakin reached the ability he was at with Obi-Wan when he was 18, when he was only 12 with Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon was the father figure Anakin needed in his life to grow up, not a sibling and brother like Obi-Wan was. Because of this, Anakin had a much better upbringing. The kids his own age stopped picking on him after he became Qui-Gon's apprentice because of the level of respect Qui-Gon was able to command. Anakin was ambitious, selfless, and overall a nice human being. Some would call him the perfect Padawan learner. He enjoyed going on long walks and adventures with Chancellor Palpatine, who would teach him many different things about the world and flip his whole belief system. Palpatine once posed a story in a way which showed that the Jedi were evil, which fascinated the young Anakin, as he had never seen the Jedi in that way. He continued to train with Qui-Gon until he completed the Padawan trials at 18 years old, becoming a Jedi Knight. This was much faster than the usual Padawan. For some, it would take up to 15 years to become a Jedi Knight.
The Inquisitor is in the temple. You know how Grand Inquisitor wanted to read the Jedi files?
Yeah.
Do you remember the thing I showed you about with Luminara Unduli, where he's like, your Form 3 is of Master Depa Billaba, and he's dissecting what kind of form he uses and who his master was just from using it?
Yeah.
You remember that part?
I remember you showing me that, yeah.
Okay, well anyways, that's Mace Windu's Padawan, Depa Billaba. If you ever...